Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you back to the second Gyeonggi Province Basic Income International Conference, hosted by Gyeonggi Provincial Government and sponsored by Gyeonggi Research Institute, Gyeonggi Province Market Revitalization Agency. I am Koo Kyung-sun, and I'll be moderating the third session of today's conference. And you can watch this conference through Gyeonggi Province YouTube channel. We'll get started with the session number 3 of the conference shortly.
From Gyeonggi Province TV, the host for today's conference. 자, 그럼 이제 세 번째 세션의 문을 열어보도록
Now let me begin the session.
본 컨퍼런스는 한국어, 영어 동시 통역으로
The
진행됩니다.
simultaneous interpretation will be provided throughout the session, so please choose the channel, relevant language channel in your YouTube channel that you wish to hear.
For today's conference. So please check the YouTube channel for your convenience. 자, 그럼 현대 자본주의 삶의 질
The third session of today's conference will be held under the theme of modern capitalism, quality of life, and basic income. We have 2 Korean speakers attending the conference in the studio, and our overseas speakers are connected online. Let me introduce the speaker and the panel discussants for our third session. We have Kang Nam-hoon, professor of Hanshin University. We also have An Hyo-sang, vice president of the AIPE. We also have speakers connected online. We have Honorable MP Karen Just of Republic of South Africa. We also have Professor Malcolm Torrey from the UK. We also have Mr. Timo Daum, visiting fellow of the WZV Berlin Social Science Center from Germany.
Hello, thank you.
I would like to invite Professor Malcolm Torrey for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this conference.
It's a great honor to meet you too. So,
Is it okay to speak now?
Please begin your presentation.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm pleased that it's happening after all. We were looking forward to coming in February, but the coronavirus pandemic prevented that, and we're very pleased, all of us, I'm sure, that you're now able to put on the conference online. I have a short presentation to offer to you about life in contemporary capitalism and the impact of basic income on it. First of all, we must be clear what we are talking about. We are talking about a basic income, and the definition is very important. Sometimes it's called different names, a citizen's basic income, a citizen's income, universal basic income. It is an income paid to every individual, regardless of any other conditions. So the amount paid is not affected by income, wealth, household structure, or employment status, nor by anything else. There is just one change which might occur as people change, and that is different amounts might be paid for people of different ages. This condition is no problem. The reason it's no problem is that we cannot affect our age, and no inquiry is required to change the basic income as our age changes. Automatic administration is preserved. The important thing about basic income is that it can start when somebody's born, and it can be turned off when they die, and no active administration is required throughout that period. Neither income, nor wealth, nor employment status, nor household structure will affect the amount being paid. It will simply keep on coming automatically every week or every month. A very important distinction to make is this one. A basic income is an unconditional income paid to every individual. But a basic income would never be implemented on its own. A basic income scheme is a basic income with specified levels for each age group, with the funding mechanism specified, with any changes to the existing tax and benefit systems fully specified, and with such other details as frequency of payment also described. This distinction is very important because sometimes we hear an argument from an academic or someone else that because a particular basic income scheme is not feasible, basic income is not feasible. That is not rational. In order for a basic income to be feasible in any country, all we need is a single basic income scheme that is feasible. And now to turn to the definition of capitalism. I take this definition from the Oxford English Dictionary. Capitalism has 3 definitions in the dictionary, and I think they're very useful ones. First of all, it is the possession of capital or wealth. Secondly, it's an economic system in which private capital or wealth is used in the production or distribution of goods, and prices are determined mainly in a free market. Thirdly, it can mean the dominance of private owners of capital and of production for profit. A capitalism can mean any or all of those 3 things, and I'm going to deal with each one in turn. So first of all, capitalism is the possession of capital or wealth. Now this makes inequality inevitable. The reason for that is that anybody who already possesses a capital or wealth of any kind is able to accrue additional capital or wealth. And those without capital or wealth find it much more difficult to gain more capital or wealth. Increasing inequality is therefore inevitable, and that has social and economic consequences. There is now quite sufficient research to show that rising inequality in a country can reduce the productivity of that country, it can reduce the economic level of that country, and of course it also has massive social implications for that country. With the basic income by increasing tax rates at the lower end of the earnings range. That would increase inequality. If, however, the basic income were to be funded by a raising of taxes across the entire income range or at the upper end, then inequality would decline. It's the details of the scheme that matter. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you a working paper in which a basic income scheme is researched for the United Kingdom, which would reduce inequality. And it's essential, if you are researching any basic income schemes in your own countries, that you ensure that the scheme as a whole will reduce inequality. In the UK, we know that existing benefits would have to be retained and recalculated if we were to reduce inequality on the implementation of a basic income. Generally, if a basic income were to be funded by a wealth tax, that scheme as a whole would reduce inequality. I'm sometimes asked whether a carbon tax would be a good way of implementing a basic income. It's a complicated question with a complicated answer. A carbon tax on its own might increase inequality and poverty. The reason for that is that the prices that the carbon tax would affect low-income households proportionally more than higher income households, because the carbon tax would raise prices of transport, fuel and food, which are higher proportions of the expenditure of low-income households than they are of high-income households. So a carbon tax on its own might increase inequality. If a basic income scheme were to reduce inequality, then carbon emissions might rise. This is a problem. Research at the London School of Economics has shown that to decrease inequality would increase carbon emissions. The reason is that the propensity to consume among low-income households is generally higher than that for high-income households. So great care would have to be taken if ever a carbon tax were to be implemented, or if a basic income scheme were to be implemented. A very useful way of solving the problems, of course, would be for a carbon tax to fund a basic income. You could then ensure that the different effects could be balanced against each other. So a carbon tax and a basic income, in fact, need each other. And it's very important in the future that we should be aware of that connection. So here's the second definition of capitalism from the Oxford English Dictionary. Capitalism is an economic system in which private capital or wealth is used in the production or distribution of goods, and prices are determined mainly in a free market. Provision in a market sometimes replaces free public provision when this type of capitalism is employed in the government of a country. We have seen that occur in the United Kingdom recently. I'm not making any value judgments here. I'm simply saying that if capitalism is the way in which you are running a country, then we might see provision in a market replacing free public provision. This would be the case for individuals and households. And so, for instance, households and individuals might be expected to purchase their own services rather than them being provided free publicly. And we can see a separate process occurring. That is, private providers, instead of government agencies, begin to provide the free public provision. So those are two different functions, and they are both a result of capitalism as an economic system in which private capital or wealth is used in production or distribution of goods, and prices are determined mainly in a free market. The first thing to say is that a basic income cannot replace public provision of services. I'm sometimes told that if we had a basic income, then we could abandon some of our public services, such as health services. The UK is very fortunate to have a free at the point of use national health service. Some scholars in the United States are particularly keen on the idea of a basic income replacing public provision of services. This would be impossible, and the reason for that is that there are different kinds of unconditionality. Our National Health Service is unconditional in relation to access. That is, if you need healthcare, you turn up and you receive it. Basic income is very different. It possesses an unconditionality of provision. What that means is that everyone receives exactly the same. With healthcare, one individual might receive no funded healthcare during their life, or very little of it. Another individual might need huge sums to be spent on their healthcare. Our National Health Service will provide that free for each of those individuals. You simply cannot replace that kind of unconditionality of access with an unconditionality of provision, because the basic income would never cover the high health costs of the high health cost individual. It can also be the case that market provision might be less efficient and effective than free public provision, and there is sufficient research available now to show this, and some of it's been conducted by the Commonwealth Foundation in the United States, and I refer you to their paper Mirror, Mirror on the Wall if you want some research on that issue. But that's a separate issue to the one that we're discussing now. The main point to take from this part of the presentation is that if someone ever suggests to you that a basic income could replace public provision of services, you need to ask them to examine carefully the different kinds of unconditionality involved. Now to turn to the employment market. The employment market is designed to balance supply and demand. that is the supply of labour, with demand for labour in industry and services. And in free markets, the price level will enable the supply and demand to be at the same level. And so the supply of labour will match the demand for labour. The problem in the employment market, in most employment markets, and in all employment markets in the developed world, is that the price that someone receives for their labour is not the wage, because the wage is taxed, and if any benefits are being received and the wage rises, then those benefits are withdrawn. And sometimes in the UK, an individual can receive 4 pence in the pound for any additional pound of earnings. That's now slowly being changed, but still, under the new benefits regime in this country, many people on what's called universal credit will receive only 24 pence in the pound for any extra pound that they earn. You will have different arrangements in your own countries, but you need to examine what they are to find out to what extent the price that someone receives for their labour is related to the wage that it is said that they receive, because they are unlikely to be receiving all of it. If a basic income were to take a worker off means-tested benefits, then they would receive a higher price for their labour and would seek additional employment, self-employment, skills and so on, because they would no longer have benefits withdrawn and so would receive a higher proportion of any increase in their wage. Another effect of basic income will be that the secure layer of income would provide additional options for work of different kinds. It would simply give people more choices to make. It would provide an exit option from bad jobs if they wanted it, and also enable people to take jobs at lower wages if they were jobs that they wanted. Research has shown that a basic income would cause employment market activity to rise. This was particularly clear in the Namibian and Indian pilot projects. So we know that in the developing world, a very small basic income could create considerable additional employment market activity. In the more developed world, the situation is more complicated, but we have already seen in the Finland trial, a minor trial, I'll grant you, but still a very interesting one, that during the second year of the trial, a small additional employment market activity was in evidence. I'm sometimes asked, isn't basic income a subsidy for wages? And wouldn't that mean that wages would fall? The answer is not as simple as that. If somebody is on means-tested benefits, then if their wages rise, then their income falls, and then their benefits fall, and so their income doesn't rise by as much as the wage. It's a dynamic subsidy, which therefore means that employers are freer to reduce wages because they know that the means-tested benefits would rise and the gap would be filled. Basic income would not do that. It would not rise as earnings fell. And so it's a static subsidy. This would mean that wage levels would be less likely to fall if we had a basic income than if a country was living with a means-tested benefits system. So a basic income would bring the employment market closer to being a free market. Wages would no longer have to provide the whole of somebody's subsistence income. People would have a greater ability to say no to undesirable jobs, so wages would rise. And with desirable jobs, wages might actually fall because people would already have a secure layer of income. An employment market closer to being a free market could be good for both the employee and the employer if the employees had a basic income. The third definition of capitalism, which I shall deal with briefly, capitalism is the dominance of private owners of capital and production for profit. We've already seen that a greater employment market exit option would be with us with basic income, which would reduce capital's dominance. Additional employment market choices for households who had a basic income would also reduce the dominance of capital and of production for profit. We will be much closer to what is called Republican freedom, the ability not to be dominated, because every individual would have a basic income. So, to sum up, capitalism, everything has its price. Basic income is very different. It is unconditional. However, although they look like opposites, they could work very happily together. At the same time, basic income represents a whole new kind of society, one in which unconditionality would be at its heart. So, basic income could contribute to a non-disruptive transition to a new kind of society founded on unconditionality, a society in which the price mechanism would be a servant of the economy and not its master. In the meantime, as we have seen, basic income could help capitalism to thrive. If you want to look at some of the issues related to a basic income, then you might be interested in some of these books. This one's on feasibility, published by Paul Grave Macmillan. This is a basic introduction to the subject, why we need a citizen's basic income. There is now a Paul Grave International Handbook written by 52 experts around the world, and that if you are a researcher in basic income, you really ought to have. This was written for the churches, and I gather that either there is or there will be a translation into Korean at some point. I haven't asked for a copy because I wouldn't be able to read it. That's the new book, Citizens' Basic Income, a multidisciplinary approach. Each chapter starts off from a different academic discipline and asks what basic income has to say to it. Here's the working paper that I mentioned earlier. It's a result of a microsimulation research project. We used microsimulation in the UK to evaluate the financial feasibility of basic income schemes. Thank you.
Mr. Malcolm Torrey, thank you for presentation. 네, 발표 잘 들었습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Malcolm Torrey. And I'd like to invite the Honorable MP Karen Just, who will chair our panel discussion.
Ms. Karen Just.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Torrey, for your insightful presentation and drawing our attention to the many ways in which basic income can complement life in contemporary capitalism. I think most people around the world sort of sense that we're in the midst of a great transformation. However, I think the problem is that many politicians, including myself in the beginning, don't really understand or recognize the fundamental changes brought about by digitalization. Now, Professor Daum, you've written extensively about the digital economy. What exactly is this transition that we're going through? What is modern capitalism? What is the digital economy? And how is it different to what we experienced before?
Is it my turn now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much, Malcolm, for this insightful presentation. I will try to answer your question, Karen, briefly. But first of all, I would like to share two anecdotes from our own country, which might help illustrate my point. During the pandemic, an online petition by a fashion designer made its rounds in Germany, which got a lot of support, asking for an unconditional temporary basic income for self-employed people who started to struggle during the pandemic. Secondly, also in my country, in Germany, universal basic income test run with 120 people receiving 1,200 euros over the time of 3 years is about to start. And 1 million people applied to partake in this experiment in only 3 days, which totally overwhelmed the organizers. These two just recent anecdotes from my own country kind of illustrate the fact that, and especially to the German broader public, it brought to attention that there is population of millions of people who are not waged, who are precarious, self-employed, an army of self-employed that have no social security net, and in a situation like the pandemic are like literally a month away from individual bankruptcy. So this situation like fostered a new debate on universal basic income. On the other hand, there was a strong rejection from, for example, from the Minister of Labor from the Social Democratic Party, insisting in no experiments, insisting on waged labor being the main or sole foundation for social security systems. So with this scenario, what it illustrates is, I think, a fundamental paradigm shift in capitalism, one which transforms itself from what you could call an industrial capitalism to a digital capitalism or network capitalism. And it is accompanied not only by the rise of digital firms like Google, etc., but of different revenue models. The exploitation of waged labor in the production process, as described by Karl Marx, for example, is still happening on a broad scale. But I think the main operations procedure of digital capitalism based on algorithms, extraction of data, extraction of user work, and especially establishing markets, platforms on which others can operate as mostly in the form of entrepreneurs. Uber, for example, is a prime example for that. Uber has no employees. Millions of people work with Uber. They are formally independent, and in this new situation, the traditional social security systems that are based on contributions of employers and employees, which is based on work, make no sense anymore, even from the perspective from capitalism itself. And that's the reason why there's a long list of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, liberal academics that became known for supporting some kind of universal basic income as a replacement for traditional social security systems. And Malcolm, you mentioned it in your talk. That's kind of, let's say, ultra-liberal of digital neoliberal version of universal basic income, which is which goals are, let's say, opposed to the ones that try to liberate people from the forces of the market, etc. It's the contrary. It comes from the background of giving these individual people that are formerly entrepreneurs, let's say, venture capital, monthly venture capital for their endeavors. So there is, I think, a strong tendency to shift social security systems towards a system like described by Milton Friedman, for example, which accelerates this this tendency of capitalism to convert all of its subject into entrepreneurs of their own workforce. So just to conclude my thoughts, I think we should recognize that we should see that. Let me bring in one quote of Rutger Bregman. He says, "Universal basic income would be the greatest achievement of capitalism," which kind of illustrates that universal basic income can be designed or is thought of by several people as a mode to increase, like to make digital capitalism work even better. And from an emancipatory stance, we have to focus on not the monetary side of universal basic income, like the income part, but on the outcome part, in the sense of a universal basic outcome, which means basic services like healthcare, mobility, education, and participation in democracy and in everyday life, etc. These are parts that have to be secured independently of the basic income in order not to fall into the neoliberal digital capitalism trap that is being set up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Professor Dam. I think what we gather from this is that this new contemporary capitalism is creating many opportunities for people, but there are also a lot of challenges that we need to be aware of, and we need to carefully navigate our way through this transformation. I think Dr. Tory also pointed out in his presentation that some basic income schemes will fit better with digital capitalism than other basic income schemes. Some will actually increase inequality while others will decrease it. Professor Kang, you were, as a result of the spread of coronavirus, you were forced to do some simulation studies here in South Korea to limit the impact of the spread of the virus. What is it that you found?
예, 한국에서는 아마도 지금 긴급 재난
Here in Korea, there was a heated debate made on the concept of basic income in the wake of the central government's decision to provide a disaster relief fund to its people. This disaster relief fund or subsidy, it was provided to all Koreans. It was the first round of disaster relief subsidy, and the second round of the subsidy will be provided selectively to those who damaged severely or the most severely by the pandemic. And those who insist on selective payment argue that if we have a limited amount of budget, that budget cannot be allocated to the entire population. So rather, we need to allocate more or the bigger amount to those who need such kind of subsidies more than others. And those who favor the selective subsidy payment favors conventional concept of welfare. However, under the contemporary capitalism or the capitalist regime, such kind of selective welfare scheme doesn't work properly. For example, currently under this modern or the contemporary capitalist regime, the majority of the middle class people are still vulnerable when there is a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. And when when those middle class people lose their jobs, then they need the national the welfare benefits or subsidies. But in the past, actually, as long as the government or the central government provides basic services, public services such as educational services, then the middle class people could actually live the ordinary lives, on their own. But here in this contemporary capitalist regime, even this middle class people can actually fall into the low-income class people and or even to the vulnerable class. So we are living in the world of dwarfs. For example, if there is a 1 million low-income class people, actually they just live kind of similar lives with a similar wage range. So it means that there are a large number of people who live on small amount of income, and also there is not much difference between this middle class people and low income class people, and even the unemployed people. So it means that in the modern society, not only the low income class people, but also some of middle class people require the welfare benefits to actually complement their low incomes. So those who favor selective payment of welfare benefits, particularly the income subsidy, ignore the fact that some of the middle class people are as vulnerable as those who are in this low income classes. So for example, if 1 million won or $1,000 is provided to the low-income class people, then there could be there is a high possibility that there is a reversal of income ranking between these low-income class people and the middle-class people. And so the selective payment of income subsidy to low-income class people can create some side effects such as reversal of income rankings, and also it will erupt a strong resistance from some of the middle-class people, which will undermine the sustainability of basic income or the income and subsidy program. So in this modern society, as I mentioned before, there is very little difference in terms of income between some of the middle class people and the low income class people. So in order to prevent the income reverse, we actually need to guarantee 70 to 80% of income of the low income class people as well as middle income class people. In this context, we need to introduce the BI or UBI program to complement or make up the low income of a majority of the people, including some of the middle class people. So as I mentioned before, if there is a selective subsidy provided to the low income people, then there will be the reversal of income rankings, and also there will be a strong resistance from the middle income class people. And also, if the central government issues deficit bonds or sovereign bonds to finance the income subsidy or income guarantee for the low-income class people, then actually it will not solve the fundamental issues of the current the issues. And also the middle-class people cannot afford such kind of tax increase. So what I want to tell you here is that if it goes like this, then even the low-income class people will not have the income guarantee on a continuous basis, because the central government will run out of the financing of the income guarantee. So that's why we should introduce universal or basic income. Thank you.
Professor Kang, thank you very much. I think you highlighted some very important points. I think there's often the confusion that basic income is just about poverty alleviation, whereas actually it is about reducing the inequality. So I think that is a very important point, and also, drawing attention to the precarity of the middle class. And I think across the world, we're seeing polarization, and we want something that brings people together and not something that keeps on pulling people apart. Mr. Ahn, as Vice President of the Institute for Political and Economic Alternatives, what are your views regarding the presentation and the comments of the speakers?
First of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation to Professor Dr. Malcolm Torrey for his insightful presentation, and it's good to see him in good shape. And actually, the speakers and the discussants point out the good impacts of basic income or universal basic income, but actually the basic income is actually invented to guarantee the livelihood of people. However, there is no substantial implementation of this basic income, and we are talking about the issues of a contemporary capitalist regime, and the issues are not limited to a small portion of the population. Rather, actually the issue is applying to a large portion of the population, including even some of the middle class people. So we need to think about the fundamental solution to the issues of this contemporary capitalist regime, and the BI, or the basic income, is a sign of our time, particularly the issues of our time. And also, we need to think about the basic income as a tool to address inequality issue. So for the past 40 years or 50 years, there has been dramatic increase of social inequality or economic inequality. There could be a lot of root causes behind this aggravated inequalities, including the digital gap. The climate crisis or the climate change is another the root cause behind this ever-increasing inequality. In the past, or the conventional capitalist regime, actually, the existing political system or economic system successfully overcame the relevant crises and issues. But for example, actually back in June 2017, US President Trump said that the US will walk away from the Paris, the climate agreement. And also, it seems that there is no global leadership in terms of fighting against the common the issues faced by the entire humankind. And also, there is a kind of the movement or kind of trend that each country is seeking its own interest, isolating itself from others. But the thing is that the global climate change cannot be tackled individually. And also, the global crisis is right next to us, and we cannot avoid the crisis without taking drastic measures. And I believe that the only resolution to such kind of global common crisis is to join our hands together and fight together. I believe crisis also provides a lot of opportunities for us to make a drastic change. So,
thank you.
And also, we need to make right and relevant decisions to fight against the common issues. And such kind of decision should be made by the majority of the people. So, the economic crisis caused by pandemic or some other global crisis can be overcome by a drastic decision made with the participation of a large number number of people, and I believe that such kind of decision can change the current the status or stalemate. And also, I've mentioned the climate change-related risks and the ecological the risks or the crisis, and we need to actually tackle these issues by changing the way of lives, the conventional way of lives, as Dr. Malcolm Torrey rightly pointed out. We need to actually change or break us away from the conventional labor market or conventional capitalist regime. And in this context, basic income can play a big role. And we all know that there are diverse discussions made on the introduction of basic income or universal basic income. And I believe that today's session should be a precious opportunity for us to have a productive and practical discussion on the BI and the UBI. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Torrey, would you like to make some concluding comments based on what the panelists said?
Yes, just a few very brief comments. Thank you for all of your contributions. This has been a most interesting session, and I've certainly learned a lot. From Timo, the rejection by your German minister of basic income is entirely understandable and is a fairly common experience. And the reason for that is that the basic income is not intuitive, and it never has been. The idea that we should give money to everybody does sound somewhat crazy. And therefore, a complex rational process needs to be in place to understand why it would work. And that's not always easy for governments and journalists who need to offer simple messages. So I perfectly understand the problem. What is beginning to be understood, though, is that a basic income would facilitate, would increase employment market activity, and the pilot projects have shown this, and the logic suggests that as well. But that's a message that's not easy to get through. In this country and in some other countries, trades unions were initially very opposed to basic income, but some of them are now beginning to understand how important it would be. This is particularly true of the trades unions that serve the more precarious ends of the employment market. It's not insignificant that the Indian pilot project, an extremely well-organized pilot project in India, was inspired by SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association of India. And the more trades unions that serve the more precarious end of the employment market get involved in this debate, the better. And I entirely agree with you on the neoliberal trap. It is an unfortunate aspect of the debate that a basic income is being weaponized as a way of destroying the welfare state that many of our countries have developed over many years. All one can say is that what matters is the kind of basic income scheme that is discussed and then implemented. It is essential to ensure that the basic income scheme does not replace existing services simply because it can't. And it's important to say that a basic income scheme must be tested for its reduction of inequality, because it would be too easy to implement a basic income scheme that increased inequality. Professor Kang, yes, we have, you put I think, a very good argument for, a very good class-based argument for non-selective payments. When there is limited money, it's understandable and intuitive that governments want to pay selective incomes. This is not necessarily rational. The important calculation is not the gross cost of a benefit, but the net cost. And so, for instance, a scheme that combined a basic income with a progressive tax system could have a low or zero net cost. And those are the kinds of schemes that we research in the United Kingdom. The important calculation is the net cost, not the gross cost, and it's the details of the scheme that matter. Mr. Arn, you raised the really interesting question about global crises, and the implications of that debate well, there are implications of that debate for the basic income debate. It is national governments that pay basic incomes if they are paid ever, and it's national governments that tax populations in order to fund basic incomes. Therefore, if a basic income is to be implemented in anything like the near future, then it will be national governments that do it. That will not necessarily solve global problems. The question is whether, if an individual national government implemented a basic income, whether other governments would then quickly follow. I think they would. There is also, of course, the option of regional basic incomes, and the most obvious location for one of those would be the European Union. And a new European Citizens Initiative is about to begin to persuade the European Parliament to discuss the issue. Whether we ever get a global basic income is, of course, an interesting question. There are campaigns for one. It looks highly infeasible at the moment. But if we ever had a number of individual countries with basic incomes, then it wouldn't be impossible to implement a global basic income eventually. But that is a long-term possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tori. I want to say thank you very much to the panelists. And then also just a big thank you to the organizers of this event and the South Korean government, specifically the government of this province. Governor Lee, I remember last year in India at the BN conference, I was also very impressed with South Korea's presentation. You are really paving the way for other countries, and it's been an honor to have been invited to participate here today. And I'm sure the panelists and Dr. Tori share my views. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Karen Just, thank you for moderating the discussion.
So we have been talking about quality of life and its connection to basic income. I would like to thank all of the speakers, moderator and discussants, and this ends our session 3. We will take a 5-minute break before moving on to session 4. Thank you.
The topic discussion and presentation of session 3 has ended. We will have a break time for 5 minutes. So please be back after 5 minutes. Thank you. 여러분 반갑습니다. 다시 인사드립니다. 오늘 국제
Good afternoon,
컨퍼런스
ladies and
사회를
gentlemen.
맡은
Welcome back
경기도청의
to the
구영슬입니다.
second Gyeonggi Province
이어서
Basic Income
진행될
International
세션도
Conference. I am
정말
Young-sul,
중요한
and I'll be
메시지를 담고
moderating the
있는데요.
fourth session
그럼 바로
of
네 번째
today's
세션을
conference.
시작해 보도록
Let us get
하겠습니다.
started with the
앞서
session
말씀드린 바와
right now.
같이 본 컨퍼런스는 한국어, 영어로 동시 통역으로
As it
진행되는
was announced
외주부장의
before, the
국문
simultaneous
또는 영문
interpretation
채널을
will be
선택하시고
available
시청해
throughout the
주시면
session. So
감사하겠습니다.
please check
Now let us
the
begin the
channel
session
you
4.
wish to
Korean and English
use.
simultaneous interpretation is available for today's conference. So please check the YouTube channel for your convenience. 네, 요즘 참 화두가 되고 있죠. 기본소득, 지역화폐,
Basic income and the local currency and the
네 번째
revitalization of
세션을
local
문을
economy have been
열어보도록
the hot
하겠습니다.
topics
오늘 컨퍼런스는
for debates
코로나19
and
확산
discussions
방지를
these
위해서
days, and that
현장
is
스튜디오엔
the
국내
subject for our number
연사분들께서만
4
자리해 주시고
session.
계십니다.
And we have
해외 연사분들은
the domestic
온라인을
speakers
통해서
as well
함께해
as overseas
주시도록
speakers,
하겠습니다.
and we have
먼저
domestic
네
speakers
번째
here
세션의 연사 및
in the studio,
패널분들을
and we have
소개해
overseas
올리도록
speakers
하겠습니다.
connected online. So let
양준호
me
인천대학교
introduce our
경제학과
speakers
교수님
first. We
자리해
have
주셨습니다.
Professor Yang Junho of
반갑습니다.
Incheon University here in the
임태현
studio, and
대한민국
we have
대통령
In Tae-yeon,
비서실 자영업
Secretary to the
비서관실
President for the
비서관님 스튜디오에
self-employed of the
나오셨습니다.
Office of the President in the studio as well.
이홍우 경기도 시장상권
And we
진흥원장님
have
함께해 주셨습니다.
President
안녕하세요.
Lee Hong-woo of Gyeonggi Province
김병조
Market
경기연구원
Revitalization
초빙
Agency.
선임연구위원님
We have Kim Byung-jo,
나와주셨습니다.
Senior Research Fellow of the GRI or Gyeonggi
네,
Research
다음은
Institute.
온라인으로 함께해 주실
Now let me
연사분들을
introduce our
소개해 드리도록
overseas
하겠습니다.
speakers who
수사나
are
마틴
joining us
벨몬테,
online. We
스페인
have
REC
Ms. Susanna
전 수석
Martin
경제학자님
Belmonte,
함께해
Chief
주셨습니다.
Economist of the REC.
레안더 빈트벨트
We have
독일
Mr.
머니터
Randall
팀장님 자리해
Bildbelt,
주셨습니다.
Project Manager of the Community Currencies in Action.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank
자,
you.
그럼 먼저 수사나 마틴 벨몬테 스페인
So we'll get started with the presentation of Ms. Susanna Martin Belmonte, Chief Economist of the REC.
We will have a speech of session 4.
Hello.
Could you please start?
Yes.
Please begin your presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me in this very interesting conference. I think South Korea is one of the most interesting places for local currencies right now in the world. So I'm going to explain briefly a couple of experiences. And I hope this enlightens a little bit how we are dealing with local currencies and basic income in local currencies in Europe right now. This is because the two projects that I'm going to present are funded by the European Union, partly, and partly with different sources, founders. So, well, the link in between these experiences is to explore the link between how you spend the money and the kind of economic model and social model that you develop with this way of spending money. This is part of a broader discussion, which is how money is created in the world, how the money that we use, the conventional currency, is created. And is created with the banking system providing loans to the public. And this, of course, has impact in how the economic system evolves, but it's difficult to test it because there's no alternative right now. So there's no other different monetary system to test it compared with the one we have. So I think that going back to the micro level, to the local currencies experiences that we are carrying out in the world, I think this is a very good way to test how different the economic system evolves compared to the conventional economic system. So the two projects I'm going to talk about is one, the REC currency, the REC currency in Barcelona. It stands for Real Economic Currency. And the other one is one that is right now in project, which is in 6 countries in the Mediterranean basins, which is the project I'm working on now, in which we're trying to use local currencies for something more than basic income, to carry out, to create circular economy models to create other ways of co-productions, of co-production of public policies, managing the commons with the community in public and community and private partnerships. Okay, so I'm going to start with the reg. This is the citizen currency that we call. This was the logo. The basic of this, the basic data of this currency is that it was a pilot test. We did it in Barcelona in a neighborhood. I'll explain later where. It's been in operation since September 2018. Is managed by a cooperative association. It's been co-founded by the Barcelona City Council also. And its main aim was to fight poverty and inequality, and make and increase the impact of public money spending. The REC belongs to a consortium that we created, G-Merits, with 2 other projects and 2 universities in Europe, Finland and Italy in particular, and it's got the prize of blockchain for social good in financial inclusion. So this is another way of it's going to impact in the financing of the project. This is a neighborhood where it started. It's been used to pay 25% of the basic income that some families, some 600 families in these neighborhoods were receiving in Barcelona. It's an area with a lot of problems with the desertification of commerce. So local commerce is disappearing. Local shops are just disappearing. So that was a problem, and that's one of the objectives of the project, is to promote the local commerce, promote the local economy, and reinforce the social links in between the neighbors. So the way the way it works is very simple. Individuals get this 25% of the basic income in their wallet, in the application in the account they have in the local currency. I'll explain later about the technology. And then they buy goods and services from the local businesses. The local businesses can then change back into the regs into euros with the managing entity, which is the association I was working for in this project. But what we encourage in this case is the recirculation that we call. We call it recirculation in the fact that the local currency, instead of being immediately changed back into the conventional currency, it is actually used again and again in the local economy, and that produces an increase in aggregated income in the area. In regards with the monetary scheme, we are using something that I don't know if you know there, but it's a payment institution. It's we in Europe there were 2 laws recently in the last decade or so that have affected the sector a lot, which is the payment system suppliers and the electronic money directives, and these 2 schemes have affected the way we can do things and the regulation in this field. So we are working with a regulated entity that allows us, allows us to have payment accounts in euros and also in regs. In regards with the technology, there is a fintech component to the system, because we are using a system that it's using the blockchain as a database. It's also using the payment apps that you can see here, with which the two participants in that transaction, the buyer and the seller, connect with a QR code, and they finish the transaction like that. They don't need a a card or anything like that. And it's got an API with which third parties can connect and create value-added products of services, payment services in general. It's got also this map that you can see in the app and in the web, and that shows the location of the businesses. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to go with the outcomes. The user satisfaction is being high for individuals. Is 92% in the last survey. For businesses, it was 88% in the last survey. They all say that the REC has increased their sales volume and the number of users of customers in their shops. They also say that the businesses, they say that they would like to be able to pay taxes and public services in REC, and also suppliers, which they do, but not enough. So this is as to the satisfaction of the participants, and in the regards with the impact in the local economy. This is what we've been studying: the local multiplier effect, economic multiplier effect of the public expenditure. So what we have, and this is something we had before, is that we know that we found out that a euro spent in a local shop has 19.5% more probabilities to do a second transaction in the area than a euro spent in a big supermarket chain. This is all a study that we did, because mainly the expenditure is on food and other basic need products and services. So this is the starting point that we had. This is a study that we did on the public expenditures of the City Council of Barcelona, and the result was, after that we put in place the REC, is that the multiplier of this area, of the public expenditure in this area, was 1.9, and after the REC, after only 13 months, it was 2.95. I think this is very important, this quantification of the increase in the economic multiplier by 54% only in 13 months, because it shows how the theory, the hypothesis is to some extent valid. Well, this is how the recirculation rate has evolved. The velocity of circulation has been more or less stable. And in summary, it's been a project that has been, this summary, that this results I've shown you is from the first 13 months. The beneficiaries spent 25% of their subsidy. It's a special subsidy, but it's not exactly basic income in all the cases. In some cases it is. And it's been satisfactory as perceived by the beneficiaries and the participants, the businesses. And it has increased the economic multiplier effect of public spending by 54% in the initial 13 months. And in this period, we couldn't make it to consolidate the social capital that we wanted. We couldn't devote the resources that we needed for this end. So this is a bit the next steps. Continue to use it to strengthen the local economy, deepen the community component for full appropriation in the community, which is what it lacked. To use it also the part of the accounts in REC in euros. We've been using the accounts in REC only. We can put in place accounts in euros, and so allow the City Council and any other stakeholder to perform as well payments in euros in the same app, in the same system, and also other more specific ideas that if I have time I could develop later. So, as I was saying, the second project, and this is there's less to say about this because it's just started only a year ago, is this Method project, which is focused on the co-production of public policies with the social and solidarity economy actors. There are six countries involved: Spain, Portugal, Tunisia, Palestine, and Jordan, and Greece. Sorry. This is the budget, and the idea is to democratize the production of public policies and using complementary currencies as another tool in the toolkit, creating a toolkit and enlarge the access of public of vulnerable communities to public services using these tools. In the end, what we are going to do is make some capacity building and training for the social and solidarity actors in the area, some action research. We'll do this pilot, demonstrative action and pilot projects, creating a monitoring and evaluation framework that can withdraw this scientific data on the results of these demonstrative actions, and facilitating the policy dialogue and networking to create a proper ecosystem for framework for co-production. And so in the sense of I'm going to go straight to the demonstrative actions. In the demonstrative actions that we're planning to do, the one in Spain is very similar to the one in Barcelona, although we will be using actually another way. We'll be using electronic money instead of payment institution, which is a difference, a technical difference. Maybe we can go into this later. And we are also very Palestine, for instance, is a circular economy circuit that we are creating with a complementary currency with which the managing entity, which will be a cooperative in the area, will be rewarding the citizens for separating properly the
온라인을 통해서
food
진행되다
and
보니까 다소
well,
어려움이
agriculture and
있습니다.
other processes of plastics, etc. And they will then produce goods and services, and the citizens will be able to use this currency, the local currency, to buy these goods and services, as well as the official currency in the area as well. No? And of course, there are other ways in which we're planning to introduce local currencies in these other experiments. It's too early to advance. Portugal will be community-based, maintenance green areas. Will be an agroforest that will be co-managed with all the citizens and stakeholders, community stakeholders, and the council. And we will plan to also reinforce the local economy with a local currency in this area that already exists since about 3-4 years ago. So this is in the summary of these two projects. I will have to strengthen the fact that we were looking for new ways of affecting the economic models, the real economy, by introducing new ways, new means of payment that we think, and the results in the REC system has shown that it really produces a change in the way the economic system reacts to this way of spending the money into circulation. Thank you very much. I will end here, and I hope that later we can talk about any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for presentation. 네, 발표 잘 들었습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you
자,
for that
그럼 네 번째
presentation,
세션의
Ms.
좌장을
Belmonte.
맡으신 양준호 교수님
Now I would
모시고
like to give the
패널
floor
토론
to
이어가도록
our moderator,
하겠습니다.
Professor
교수님
Yang, who will be
부탁드리겠습니다.
starting the panel discussion for session 4.
저 수사나 박사의
Dr.
아주
Susanna
좋은,
Belmonte, thank you very
발제
much for that
정말 감사드리고요.
presentation.
지역화폐 연구자로서
As a
개인적으로도
scholar
굉장히 공부가
studying
많이 된
local currency, I was able to learn a lot of
아주
valuable
뭐,
information through your
여러분들도
presentation, so I appreciate your presentation very much. I am sure that the
느끼셨겠지만,
audience
이 지역화폐
also
프로젝트와 관련된 이런 좀
would have
협치,
felt
이
that
체제,
local currency
이런
requires a lot
것들은
of
상당히 우리
collaboration,
한국의
and that
지역화폐 정책 또는 지역사랑 상품권
that when we
정책에
compare
있어서도
what we've
굉장히
just heard with
중요한
Korea's
그런
local
키워드다
currency
이렇게 볼
initiatives,
수가
this
있겠는데요.
collaboration
또 하나는
is a very
이제
important piece. I think that's something that we are
BMA
finding in
이제
common.
이 스페인
There's also,
바르셀로나
I think we
북동부
have to talk of
그 빈곤 지역의
B-Mincome,
이 주민들에 대한
which
이른바
was
이제
a
정책자, 그러니까
policy
기본소득을
support, a subsidy to
기본소득의
the
25%를
people who live
지급하는
in
뭐
the
이런 어떤
northeastern
실험은
part of Spain.
이번 세션
And so that is another project that's related with, I think, related with the theme of Session 4, because these projects connect local currency with basic income initiatives. I think also I've been hearing that many municipalities or cities in Europe are also creating alliances to create a local currency program, which I don't see here in East Asia. And so this coalition across cities is also a very refreshing approach. So we have 4 discussants participating in our session. As a moderator, I do have to be mindful of time. And so I would like to ask that each speaker limit their discussions to 8 to 9 minutes each. So each discussant will be given 8 to 9 minutes each. And after we hear from all 4 discussants, I will then give Dr. Belmonte an opportunity to respond. I would like to propose that we carry forward that way. I think if everything falls in, Dr. Belmonte would have around 8 to 10 minutes before we end. So session 4, as you would heard, is titled Basic Income, Local Currency, and Revitalizing the Local Economy. Because as you've just heard from the project, for example, the RC project, the basic income is tied with local currency so that basic income can help revitalize the local economy and also use the basic income project as an opportunity to issue and circulate local currency. So these 2 programs are tied in, coupled closely to create a greater effect. And I think the fact that we have this session devoted to local currency as part of this international conference for basic income, I think is a strong demonstration of the great sense that the Gyeonggi provincial government has about the topic. We have in the studio from the President's office, the Blue House, Secretary In, who is the Secretary to the President. So I propose that we start with Mr. In, who has 8 minutes. I am working as the Secretary to the President for the self-employed at the office of the President. It's great to be invited to this great conference and participate in the discussion. And I believe that we are dealing with the subject which is quite philosophical, and also I believe that other experts and discussants will deal with some other aspects of the local currency and the basic income. So I'll put my presentation focus on the Korean local currency from the perspective of the central government. We have a few local currencies here in Korea, and some of them are regional love voucher. That's the name of the local currency here in Korea. So let me brief you on how the local currency is being operated in Korea.
좀 짧게 하기 위해서 간단하게 설명을
So I'll do
하겠습니다.
my best to make a brief
경제적으로 저희가 지금
presentation.
지역 화폐의 효과 또는 그
We need to think
효과이면서 또
about
한편으로는
the
그
effect of the local currency
경기이기도
from the
한
perspective
그
of
두
local
개의
economy.
큰 그 개념을 가지고 있습니다.
And I believe that the effect of the
하나는
local the
지역화폐를
currency
통해서
can be
우리가
divided
얻고자 하는
into two
것이
major
무엇이냐라고 할 때
categories.
첫
The first
번째는
one is what kind
지역
of the
경제의
outcome we are
선순환
looking for
구조를
with the
이루는
operation
수단으로
of a
개인
local
지역화폐를
currency.
활용한다는
We would
것입니다.
like to create a
그리고 두
virtuous
번째는
economic cycle of the local
소상공인들,
economy by operating a local economy. And secondly, we would like to secure the sales base for small and micro business owners by operating a local currency here in Korea. And there is one underlying message. Even though I've divided two categories in terms of the expected impact or the effect of the local currency, we all know that large conglomerates actually dominate the distribution channels or the logistics. And also these large conglomerates dominate a small community markets as well. So it means that the local income outflows to the external cities. So we actually introduced the local currency to prevent outflow of local income. And in order to do so, we actually introduced local currency to create the sales base for the local small and micro business owners. And actually, the effect of this local currency is to resolve the blind spot of the legal tender while actually preventing the outflow of local income. And we have a legal basis for the introduction of local currency, which is the National Constitution Article 123. So the central government should help local economies and the local regions develop in a balanced way. And also, as I mentioned before, the second part of the effect of the local currency is to expand and secure the business basis for small and self-employed businesses in the local economy. We all know that the large companies have a dominant power in the modern capitalist economy. So we need to come up with certain measures to support the small alley commercial district business owners. That's how we came up with the introduction of local currency program.
근데 이것은 어느 정도 그 역사가 있었습니다.
If we take a look at the history of the Korean local currency, it started back in 1997, and there was a local currency movement made in a regional city here in Korea called Hanbatles, and it was developed into a Seongnam City Love Voucher in 2007. And with the inauguration of President Moon and his government, there has been movement to make this local currency as a nationwide movement. So 177 the local governments out of 226 issue the local currencies, which is reaching 2.3 trillion Korean won. And also the central government provided the fiscal subsidy to the local governments so they can issue the local currencies on their own. So this year, in the year 2020, around 9 trillion won of local currency has been issued in local communities, and actually 80% of the total the issuance of the local currency was supported and subsidized by the central government. So you can see the increase of the volume of the local currency issuance over the course of time. And the central government was set or earmarked as a national budget of 15 trillion for the issuance of local currency for next year, and 1 trillion will be actually earmarked for the purpose. And if it goes as planned, then the local currency or the local voucher can be issued in a larger volume next year, so more the local people can use those local currencies or local vouchers. Unlike other European countries where this local currency movement was made centering around the local communities, here in Korea, the local currency movement was initiated by the central government and the local governments. So recently, the central government of Korea actively support the issuance and the circulation of local currencies in different regions of the nation. And there are 3 actors in terms of the operation of the Korean local currency. One is the central government, as I mentioned before. As of July this year, there was a revision of the national law made to provide a legal basis for the operation and the issuance of the local currency. And this revised law enables the central government of Korea to support the local governments to issue and circulate a local currency. And another actor in the Korean local currency operation is metropolitan and autonomous governments. So these metropolitan autonomous governments are provided with the fiscal subsidy from the central government, and also these metropolitan autonomous government need to make investment in the local currency issuance and operation. And the other actor is the primary local governments. Actually, the primary local governments conduct the contract with the merchant who are registered for the utilization and the circulation of the local currency. So we have a perfect the division of roles and responsibilities between these 3 different actors for the operation of Korean local currency. Let me take an example of the city of Kunsan here in Korea. For the past 15 months, around the average 15 million won of the sales increase was experienced by the merchant, the store that is registered for the utilization of local currency. And also, when it comes to another example of the city of Siheung, actually each registered merchant see the increase of 7.3 million won of sales revenue. And also another case in point is the city of Incheon. And actually, the outflow of local income was reduced by 71 billion won per year, and also the increase of the internal, internal consumption in the specific region increased by a similar amount. And these are a few examples of the local currencies issued and operated by a few local governments or the municipal governments. That concludes my presentation, and I believe that the more details or some other points will be covered by other discussions. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you, Mr. In, for your discussion. Mr. In, I guess, gave us the central government's perspective of the central government's efforts to promote the wider use of local currency programs by various local governments. For example, the fact that the government has increased its fiscal support and also has updated the laws, so the legal frameworks that support the local currency program. I think considering the fact that I think these were very timely policy responses provided from the central government's perspective. And as Dr. Belmonte mentioned, when we look at Spain or overall Europe, or Japan, there are local currency programs there, but I think in Korea, the local currencies are focused more on revitalizing the local economy, especially supporting the local shops rather than income support. I think that's sort of a main feature that distinguishes Korea's local currency programs. And then we have also heard from Mr. In some of the achievements in terms of data that we see from the local currency programs. Next, we will hear from Germany. As you know, local currencies are also referred to complementary currencies, and we have from Germany, Dr. Winderbart connected. Dr. Winderbart, you also have around 8 minutes. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for having me and for making this possible. It has been quite a process since February to actually bring this about. And it's really a great moment that it's finally happening and we can share ideas in this way at least. Pity not to have come to Korea and learn more about the local projects there as well and get more in-depth insights. So since I don't have a presentation to show in this format, it's pretty hard to follow more complex, nuanced examples and ideas. So I'll come back to the bigger ideas and picture, starting with how basic income is discussed in Germany, for example, where I would just highlight that the word basic has two meanings in the discussions that I see internationally. And Germany has a particular idea when we talk about basic income there. So basic could, on the one hand, and I think that's how it is mostly discussed in the English-speaking world and probably also at the conference, even though I haven't seen the previous sessions today, but it basically means a little bit of money for everybody, like a basic amount of income for everybody, where there's a different direction or philosophy in the universal basic income discourse, where basic actually means enough money for everybody. So when people advocate for universal basic income in Germany, it's always to mean you give everybody, regardless of age and economic standing, you give everybody enough money so they don't actually have to worry about money at all anymore. It's just very different from the level of just general numbers that are discussed. So in Germany, people would also run experiments where the level of basic income would be around 1,500 euros, $1,500 if you like. And if you discuss basic income schemes of that kind, of course, the costs of these schemes and the financing of these become the big question that everybody pitches in on, and most resistance comes from saying no state, no government can ever fund something like that. But that's, of course, where also the interesting welfare and also psychological effects of these schemes would then manifest. So in that sense, I'm often asked, couldn't a complementary currency help with the financing of a universal basic income scheme? And to that, it's very interesting to compare very different complementary currencies out of the range of possibilities we heard now from Barcelona and also from Korea. One very specific model, so to say, which is sometimes called a local currency model, but it's really important to understand that there's a much bigger possibility range of what you could do. And that's what Susanna Belmonte referred to earlier as the connection between local currency initiatives and experiments to the bigger field of monetary reform and rethinking how we organize money in general. So I hope I understood this correctly, but I assume that also in Korea, the shops that accept the local currency can also change that back to conventional currency again, to one. And in that sense, which is the same in Barcelona, and it's also the same with a lot of regional currencies or local currencies in Germany. But that still means that what you're using there is conventional money, it's the national money. You're just focusing in a very interesting and innovative way on the way this money gets spent. And you can see how even changing a little bit of the possibilities and the rules and the ideas that people have when they spend their money, when they use their money, you can achieve a lot of positive effects, as the numbers that we heard earlier demonstrate. But in general, also to the legislator, and I would be really interested to hear more about this new law you talked about in Korea earlier, but to the legislator, these local currencies, the REC in Barcelona and probably the local currencies in Korea, are still just conventional currency. So in Germany or in Barcelona, say, the legislator still looks at that, or the regulator still looks at that it's euros by a different name. And of course, in that sense, you're also always limited by conventional finance and conventional ways of how much money there is in the economy and how you could create more in terms of what you can do on the local level and how much you can issue and distribute to these new channels. When we speak of universal basic income schemes that go much deeper and broader, and you would actually like to distribute enough money for people to really live from, those would be very limiting in terms of where would that money come from. And there, of course, it's very interesting to also use complementary currency experimentation on the small and local level to see what else could be done. So you might have seen in the documentation of the conference that 5 years ago I was, like Susanna is now, a manager of a European project where local governments were using these complementary currencies ideas to experiment what they could do differently in terms of money. And there we had a very large range of different currency models and also issuance models. So we had currencies like the REC in Barcelona and like the local currency in Korea that were still linked and issued backed by conventional money, but we also had currencies that were completely independent of the conventional money. Technically, they were called closed loop payment systems, which just means even the merchants can't get out of the loop again. They can't change back to the conventional money. And in terms of regulation, this has the advantage that it's completely, well, in one way you could say unregulated, but it's also not limited by the conventional laws that refer to banks and how they issue conventional money. So in that sense, there's a much bigger range of possibilities. Once you have an actor like a local government involved that has a network power and a position where they could actually create systems big enough to provide all basic needs for everybody, maybe you wouldn't actually need the link to the conventional money system anymore. And also you could go beyond the limitations of that. So a local government is then the argument in very crude strokes, could issue enough money of a very different kind that is not linked to conventional money anymore to finance a lot of different new ideas, including a universal basic income. There could be also money, well, currency ideas and implementation that have by the unit of value, nothing to do with conventional money, and thus are also not limited by financing issues or regulatory legal issues. For example, time banks was something that in our European project, some local governments experimented with, where you cannot change it back to euros in Europe or to conventional money, and they operate on a very different incentive base. So you also don't have the psychological and behavioral economic limitations of what happens when you introduce money into a relationship on the ground. And of course, what Susanna also mentioned with some of the implementation, the Medtown project, you could have very, very different ideas of how to incentivize a local economy, how to incentivize people to collaborate with each other, and loyalty points or incentive points as the, I think that's what Susanna referred to in terms of the recycling projects in the Mediterranean. You could just find very different ways to get people collaborating again in an economic sense, but without actually referring or using conventional money. And that's also going beyond the limitations that are there currently on the money we currently use in terms of how much there is, but also in terms of what is legal and what you can do. And for that, it's really exciting to see a provincial government getting involved and giving so much support. And once you realize how much possibilities and the range of possibilities that would actually offer, I think that would be a very powerful experimentation field, but also maybe even going into implementation and actually making something real that couldn't happen without such high-level governmental support. So thank you very much, and I hope we have a little time later to get to individual questions and discuss that a little more. Thank you.
네, 빈드벌트 박사님.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wildbolt, for your insightful comments and remarks. I believe that some of you may find some terms very unfamiliar, and also some of you may feel that actually the concept is quite similar. Actually, Dr. Bolt come up with the idea of alternative currencies. For example, the complementary currencies. For example, here in Korea, we do have several types of local currencies. So once you purchase or recharge those local currency, you can use it in some registered merchants. This is a one-time purchase, and once you make purchase with this recharged local currency, then it's gone. But the key here is how we can recirculate these local currencies through several steps. So in the case of Korea and its local currency, we have very low rate of recirculation, and that's one of the characteristics of the Korean local currency. And I have done lots of researches on this local currency circulation and operation. So in order to maximize the effect of the local currency, we need to actually increase the recirculation rate. That is a key to the local currency policy. And in this context, the points that made by Dr. Wilde, but particularly the complementary local currency, is quite interesting and case in point. So thank you, Dr. Wildebot, for providing us with a lot of innovative ideas with regard to this complementary currencies. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Lee Hong-woo, President of the Gyeonggi Market Revitalization Agency. Thank you.
Yes, we've been talking about a complementary currency. We've heard of time banks, which is also a very interesting idea. I hope eventually we will get there. My name is Hong-woo Lee. I am the chair of the Market Revitalization Agency, the president. And as you know, we have Gyeonggi Province is, I think, the only province in Korea that has an executive institution dedicated to supporting the market revitalization. So the Gyeonggi Province government has always been focused on supporting the local economy, especially given COVID-19, which is a serious crisis for those small, for example, store and shop operators. They are feeling the impact every day. And all of this, for example, helping the sustainability of the local economy, the shops, stores, and using basic income to help that, to maintain that and increase economic activity, I think is a very important question. Especially, you've already heard that the Gyeonggi provincial government has always been very interested in local currency and have issued quite a large size. And the reason that we are doing that is because we believe we are at a stage where profit-seeking is threatening the dignity of human beings. And we are seeing this extreme situation where profit-seeking is dominating the society, and humans are not able to live with their dignity. And we think that it is an obligation of the local governments even to address the situation. I am the head of the Market Revitalization Agency of Gyeonggi Province. So I've prepared a little talk about an update of what we are doing here in Gyeonggi Province. We have 700,000 small shop owners, which employs 1.5 million people. Also in Gyeonggi Province, we have around 250 traditional markets, and there are about 70,000 merchants who work or have their shops in these traditional markets. So you can see that we have a very diverse and grassroots economy. Of course, all of them are being challenged every day for their survival because of COVID-19. We want to have more economic activity happen in the neighborhood stores, these stores that you see right outside your door. I think our conclusion at Gyeonggi province level was that we didn't have an effective way of supporting the local economy, the local economic activity, and that is why I think we will be issuing around 2.1 trillion Korean won in local currency just at the province level. In 2019, May was the survey, and from May 2019, so it's been about a year and 4 months, the stores that registered for our local currency increased by around 52,000, and around 4.4 million residents of Gyeonggi province have registered their cards to use their local currencies. So we are hearing that around 2.1 trillion is the amount of local currency that was spent in terms of spending volume. And our registered shops are saying on average their revenue increased by 7%. And overall, I think the shop owners, the store owners are saying with local currency, by registering for local currency, overall they're seeing more activities in their stores. And I think this is because we were able to get that positive effect because local currency is a very effective means of stimulating local economic activity. As you know, we do provide a subsidy to the local economy, local currency, and I think that the subsidy that we provide as part of the program is playing a very important role. So when the 4.4 million shops were signing up, we have the 30 municipalities within the province that have provided very active support. In terms of registration, in terms of accessibility. For example, we created a mobile app where people can sign up, and if they actually charge their app with $100, they would immediately get an extra credit of 10% right now because we have a 10% discount program, and that is why people are being motivated to use more, to charge more of their local currency wallets. So last year, our target was 380 billion Korean won, but we were actually able to issue around 570 billion. So we overachieved our target by around 23%. And our original target this year was 800 billion, but actually I think this year we will exceed 2 billion. So we are actually very much overachieving on our issuance volume targets for local currency. And I think the reason why we're seeing so much growth in the local currency volume is because the users, both the consumers and the shop owners, are actually feeling the benefit. Of course, COVID-19 was an opportunity because with COVID-19 there was talk of a disaster of basic income, and Gyeonggi province was the first to say, let's provide the basic income in local currency. And the local shop owners were saying once that disaster basic income was issued in local currency, the amount of shop activity they saw was very similar to what they would see during the holiday season. And I think this shows the effects of basic income. Of course, you can run the models, do the theory, the scholars can analyze, but that was not enough to actually make this pick up. But I think ironically enough, COVID-19 inevitably created the situation where there was basic income paid out and people were able to experience the benefit, the strong multiplier effect that basic income brings when it's paid out in local currency. We are here to talk about basic income. And I think basic income could be paid out in local currency. But what we can also do is there's also, for example, we could do youth income. There could also be other benefits that could be paid out in local currency. So Gyeonggi province is providing local currency not only for basic income, but also for other programs, public programs that we run. So I would like to propose that other public spending programs be paid out in local currency, because it does actually bring a difference in the local economic activity. And I think Gyeonggi province has been using that very effectively. And I very strongly recommend the other 17 local governments benchmark the Gyeonggi province experience. So I said that 4.4 million members are using it, and the stores are saying 62% of the stores are saying they're satisfied, 72% of the users are finding it satisfactory. But I do notice RSC satisfaction rate is in the 90%. So my first question to Susanna is, why is RSC getting so high satisfaction levels? Do you have an answer to that question? Also, Governor Lee actually set a limit so that only stores that have a certain level of revenue, that's 1 billion revenue or less, can actually sign up to receive REC. So I'm wondering if there are limits on the store side for REC too. Are certain stores not allowed to accept REC if they're, for example, large, for example, nationwide supermarkets? Also, I have another question about how REC was more of a bottom-up approach from the community up. For example, in Korea, some of the local currencies that are paid out, because there's a discount, some people use that actually to make money off of it by discounting it in circulation. I'm wondering if there are any fraud or misuse cases related with REC. If so, how is it prevented? Also, I've heard that REC is blockchain-based, which does enhance transparency. What are the advantages you see in a blockchain-based currency? Thank you very much for those questions, Mr. Lee. We, I think, have only 15 minutes left in our entire session. So, as a moderator, I am being pressed about the tight time. I would like to suggest that we pick up our pace from now on. And Mr. Lee did mention some questions, and so I would like to ask Dr. Belmonte to prepare her answers, because you may only have about 5 minutes at the end of the day. We have our last discussant, who is Dr. Kim.
From Gyeonggi Research Institute. So I can give as long as 8 minutes to you. Please proceed with the presentation. It seems that Susanna's presentation provided us with a lot of insightful points, and I'll do my best to make a brief comment. The title of my discussion topic is The Challenge Ahead of Local Currency in its Way Toward a Fair and Sustainable World. Now let me brief you on the characteristics of Gyeonggi provincial currency. Gyeonggi province has very significant characteristics. Actually, it embodies the national economic structure as well as economic issues. So when it comes to the size of population or the regional GDP or the size of trade or the size of the working age population, actually Gyeonggi province is #1 in among different cities here in Korea. So this is the largest metropolitan city in Korea except Seoul. And since Gyeonggi province is such a large province, it actually suffers from different income, the status among different the counties and the primary local areas. And also, the Gyeonggi province is divided into two by DMZ, demilitarized zone. So I think that's the end of the explanation of the specific characteristics of the Gyeonggi province. And now let me talk about the achievement made by Gyeonggi province in terms of its local currency operation. Actually, 31 primary local governments under the umbrella of Gyeonggi province successfully launched their own local currencies. And also those small municipal governments or the primary local governments has a strong authority and drive for the operation of their own local currencies with closed loop structure. And also there was a relevant legal base provided for the operation of local currencies with the revision of the relevant law and establishment of new regional ordinance. And also there was a significant turnaround point made in terms of the operation of local currency in Gyeonggi province. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic damaged the livelihoods of ordinary people. And as a part of the national disaster relief subsidy, the local currency was used here in Gyeonggi province. And actually, the local currency was found to be or approved to be a very effective tool for the payment of disaster relief subsidies, which is also a part of disaster relief basic income. And now let me talk about the four characteristics of Korean the local currencies. The Korean local currency, the system is driven by local autonomous bodies, and also the local currency policy here in Korea is a kind of conversed the policies combined with digital technology. And also the local currency program is very effective in improving the participation of the locals or the local people. And as I mentioned before, the fourth industrial revolution technologies, particularly digital technologies, are reflected and combined for the issuance and operation of local currencies here in Korea. And last but not least, actually, the Korean local currency has made a great contribution to the promotion of local autonomy and local democracy. So while you're using and circulating local currency, the local people pay more attention to the local administration and its relevant operation, and actually it can boost the locals' love and affection towards their own the community. And it seems that there is high possibility that local currency can make a contribution to the improvement of grassroots democratic movement. As I mentioned before, the Korean local currency was used for the provision of COVID-19 disaster relief basic income in Korea. So not only the central government but also the Gyeonggi provincial government used the local currencies when they provided the disaster COVID-19 disaster relief basic income, and as a result, you can see a dramatic increase of sales revenue in the local, the registered stores for the use of local currencies. The red line shows 149% of sales increase of the merchant, and you can see that there's only 87% of sales increase for non-merchant or non-registered stores for the local currencies. Since the disaster relief basic income was paid in local currency, you can see the dramatic sales increase of the local stores registered for the use of local currencies. This demonstrates a positive effect of local currency. And there are also some potential uses for local currency. For example, the basic income for the disabled. This is just one idea. So at a small county level, particularly for the counties with a economy suffer from the recession, and the basic income provided to the disabled in the form of local currency can revitalize the county economy. And also another idea is inter-Korean local currency, which can be circulated and used in both South and North Korea. It will boost the relationship between the two Koreas, and I can go on and on with regard to the ideas of local currency usage. When we talk about local currency, we talk about expected effect of local currency, but we also need to think about why we need to introduce a local currency. Actually, local currency is required to fight against the undesirable effect of neoliberalist capitalism, and also local currency can be a very effective tool to protect the vulnerable people. So I believe that we need to think about why we need to introduce local currency, particularly from the perspective of protection of the vulnerable, before we think about the expected outcome of local currency. Last but not least, I would like to make a comparison between the local Korean local currency and RECE project in Barcelona, Spain. It seems that actually the Barcelona case demonstrates the good or the positive aspect of the networking and alliance among different regions or the partners or actors. So please, Dr. Susanna Belmont, what kind of ideas can you share with regard to the creation of such kind of network here in Korea? Thank you very much.
Actually, Mr. Kim is a local currency expert. I do regret not being able to give him enough time to share all that he has prepared. I am getting sort of the red light from the hosts, the organizers, to mind my time. I do regret not being able to give Mr. Kim more. I would like to go back then to Dr. Belmonte. You would have had some questions about REC from the discussants. Including those questions, can you give us a wrap up in like 5 minutes?
Oh, absolutely. Well, as I was saying before, I wish I could have more information about your systems in Korea. The experiments we've done in Barcelona, the ones we're doing now in Seville and other cities, are just really tiny experiments and baby steps compared to what you've done already. So I think I'm honored to be here, and I really wish we can go on this conversation by other means, by email, etc. So I'm going to go to the questions. So the BEM income project that you, the moderator was mentioning, yes, this is a minimum guaranteed income experiment that was carried out in the same project of the REC. The REC was part of the REC, as you have said, is part of BEM income project. The local currency is part of the basic income experiment. It's got well. I really have no time to explain the results, but I can provide some more additional information in reports, etc. About networking and cooperation, what we achieved at the REC was a high level of cooperation with local entities, with the social and solidarity economy in Barcelona, which is quite strong. But we really wanted to go farther here, and this is what it is to come. We only had 13 months of operations with the with the Beam Income project, and the idea is to go on and to deepen the relationships to introduce to invite more the neighbors to the co-creation of the currency and the operation, etc. But this is something that we haven't really done. We can learn from self-managed complementary currency systems that are running in several cities in Spain and in Europe and in the world in general. And these are totally community-based. And of course, we're going to learn from them and increase, this is the idea, no? To increase this operation. This networking with the community, with the neighbors. In regards to the satisfaction levels, I think we should go into the survey that we did. When I say the level of satisfaction is 92% for the individuals, I mean that that's the percentage of people who said they are satisfied or very satisfied in the survey. I don't know if you measure it the same way. I'm sure we can go to the technical chart of the survey, so you can have a clear idea of what maybe the differences, maybe technical, or maybe in the operation, maybe the users are more satisfied. But this is something that we have to go through the whole details of both systems to understand why it's happening this way, and which is something really interesting that I would like to do. So maybe some future collaboration here. The limits to the entrance of different businesses in the system, there are no limits, but it's true that we only went to see the local businesses. We only went to see and invite the local businesses, although some users tried, asked some chains, not very big chains, but some chains, some supermarket chains to be included in the system. And these chains were invited and they refused. So they didn't want this particularity in the financial operation. It was complicated for them, so they didn't want to introduce that. So in principle, there were no limits because we don't have the legal basis to establish a limit to receive public money. There's the competition rules in Europe, which are very fiercely defended, and that's where we are. We have also, this is something the Council of Barcelona commissioned me to do, is a research on the externalities, the positive externalities of the local businesses. And this is a basis for future differentiation in this regard. So possibly put some limits there, but there's no legal basis for now. So that's what happens. The idea is to move forward these limits because otherwise it will, of course, be not very efficient as it can be. So bottom up, not really. This initiative was running. The initiative of the REC was pushed by an NGO, by me personally, as an activist in this field and researcher. But in the end, there was the funding of the European Union. And this was very important, to be honest, because it's true that community currencies have this problem of people getting burned up when they are for a long time pushing forward this kind of schemes without getting paid or anything. So, of course, when you see there are public effects, public benefits to something like a local currency, the right thing to do is to fund it. Otherwise, it's very unsustainable. So about the fraud, we have had some notice of some users asking a shop to just change the local currency into euros, but it's been anecdotic. It's been like we've heard it once. Well, so I think that if it was generalized, we would have heard more of that. So I think the fraud is in general very low. But yeah, who knows? We need to. You have to bear in mind we're operating for 30 months only, so so that was not very much a very long time. When the basic income in Barcelona stopped as a pilot to be able to wrap up and evaluate properly the project, well, the currency also started to receive less and less currency in circulation because there was no new money in circulation coming in. About the blockchain-based advantages. Potentially, the blockchain can give you transparency and traceability. This is the idea. It also can help you integrate different systems. If you have different local systems, as you have there in Korea, the idea is that with the blockchain, it's easier to integrate. This is what the banking system is doing, so it's obviously a way to go. But yeah, at the stage we are, how small we are, well, yeah, it's okay, but we haven't really used it much of these potentialities because it's something that you will see when you really have a large scale and when you really need to trace what's going on with the money, and when you really have other systems similar that can or should be integrated. But yes, that's the reason we did it in blockchain technology. We want to reinforce that part of the project. And yes, that's. But I have to say that from the whole operation of a local or complementary currency, this part is the least important. There's many more aspects that have to be taken into account that are much more important than the technology itself. The technology has to work, and that's it. And I think I found very interesting the contributions of Dr. Kim in terms of how local currencies can contribute to increase the democracy and the participation of people in the system in general, in the society, in the economic system, etc. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I would really love to hear more about and understand much more about the systems that you are running there in Korea. And I hope we can go on in touch and work together in the future.
네, 벨몬테 박사님.
Thank you very much, Dr. Belmont,
사실 연결되기 어려운 분이셔서
for your great answer. And
우리 세션 시간은 조금 초과되었지만
this is not a kind of open opportunity for us to have great experts like Dr. Belmont or Dr. Goldwald. So we are just running behind our original schedule for our fourth session of the day. And this session was held under the theme of basic income, local currency, and the regional economy. It seems that we just didn't have enough time to have an in-depth discussion on basic income. So we rather focused on the local currency and local economy. So I would like to extend my apology for not being able to have enough time for in-depth discussion on basic income. We all know that basic income is not ordinary income like a kind of wage or a paid work related income. Basic income is a kind of income provided based on the needs of people, not based on the work that they provide. So basic income is related to the survival or the livelihood of people.
주민들의 필요라고 하는 이 개념이
As a result, or in this context, identifying the needs and satisfying the needs of the people and the local people is very critical when we deal with the basic income. So the local currency here in Korea is used in local shops or the merchant shops, and that's the end of the story. However, we need to go deeper than that. As Dr. Bildbart rightly pointed out, actually the local currency should be used to boost the relationship among the members of the society. And also the time bank is a great idea, right? The social, the talent or the capabilities of the members of the society can be exchanged based on the system like a time bank. And by doing so, we can address the needs of those who are ignored or who are in the blind spot of the national welfare or the local welfare. That should be the very nature or the bottom line of basic income as well as the local currency. So the basic income is the income provided based on the needs of the recipients or the entire the population. And when this basic income, which is living up to its true spirit, should be combined with the local currency system to maximize the relevant effect. And the basic income is provided unconditionally and undiscriminatory. Undiscriminatory way. So we need to actually understand the universality and unconditionality of basic income, and this kind of characteristic is combined with the local currency, and then the volume of the local currency issuance and operation and circulation can increase. So for the success of local currency, the basic income should be combined with local currency. And for the successful operation and introduction of basic income, the local currency should be combined with the basic income operation. In this context, REC is a very exemplary case because it shows the perfect combination between the local currency and the basic income. And also another implication that we can get from the REC pilot or the Midtown pilot partnership project is that the networking and the partnership is very important to create a maximum impact or the outcome. So the local currency cannot succeed without active participation of the locals. So the success of the local currency lies in the maximizing the functions of local currency as currency. In order to maximize the currency function of the local currency, active participation of the locals is essential. So the local currency should be introduced in a way to truly live up to the needs of the locals. And actually, the locals or the people should participate in the introduction of the local currency system, actively participate in decision-making process even. So Dr. De Belmont said the local currency can be dubbed the kind of citizen currency, and I actually love the term, the citizen currency, because it epitomizes the very fundamental nature of local currency. So this session was quite insightful and reminded us of the very fundamental nature of local currency. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to Gyeonggi Provincial Government for organizing this timely and great conference. Thank you very much.
네, 양준호 교수님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang, for that wonderful moderation. I would also like to thank all of the speakers, and that is the end of session 4. We will go into a break before we move on to session 5.
The topic discussion and presentation of session 4 has ended. We will have a break time and we'll be back with the session 5. Thank you.
It has a translation icon.
여러분 반갑습니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are continuing with the Second Gyeonggi Province Basic Income International Conference. We are now at the final session of the program. I appreciate that you're tuned in with us till this last session. As I had mentioned, this conference is being simultaneously interpreted into both English and Korean. You will be able to choose your language on the YouTube channel. Please choose either Korean or English on the YouTube channel as you need.
So please check the YouTube channel for your convenience.
The theme of the last session is the crisis of the welfare state and basic income. We actually are feeling various issues that are creating a crisis, and we'll be looking at how basic income will be used to address these. We have the Korean speakers here in the studio. We have our overseas speakers connected online. I would like to introduce our speakers and panelists for Session 5. We have first in the studio Professor Seung-Yoon Lee of Chungang University, Social Welfare. Also, we have Professor Jung Hee-seo of Kunsan University. And then we have online our speaker, moderator, and panelist. We have, first of all, the keynote speaker of our first international conference. We have Ms. Annie Miller, who is from the Citizen Basic Income Trust. We also have Herman Obier, who is from the Turk University in Finland. Also, we have as a discussant Mr. Sarat Dabala of BN, Vice Chair. Yes, thank you very much. So why don't we start directly with a presentation by Mr. Obier, who is the senior researcher of Turk University.
We'll have a speech of Session 5.
Please.
Mr. Herman Obier.
Go ahead, sir.
Please begin your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. And thank you for organizing this really important conference at this very timely moment. I think today I'm going to talk about how basic income could possibly help to address the rapidly growing crisis, which is both a welfare crisis and with COVID-19, obviously a social and economic crisis as well, especially for working age people. The reason why I want to focus on this particular group of people, it's obviously because the people who need it the most right now are within this working age bracket, roughly between 18-year-old and 60-plus-year-old. And I think right now we live in this particular moment in world history where basic income can do much more than the traditional welfare state in addressing the growing inequality and economic needs of this particular group of people. So briefly, this will be about some of the key context, and I'm going to choose 2 European countries which I think are quite symbolic of the current tendencies, both in Europe and the world. Of course, it varies quite a lot between different continents and countries, but I think they can act as some kind of symbols of what's going on, and I will explain that briefly in a minute. So we will compare 2 kinds of policies here briefly to highlight this contrast. One is basic income, of course, and the other is called universal credit. It's a policy that is being implemented in the UK, in Britain at the moment, but as you will see, this policy has been also seen as a model by some conservative elites, for example, in other countries who think that this is the way forward. And roughly speaking, in a global kind of vocabulary, you could associate basic income with the unconditional cash transfers that are being rolled out in many countries, especially in the majority world, in the global south. And in Europe, you have universal credit, which is like a conditional cash transfer. And this is also being rolled out in many parts of the world. And I think they symbolize 2 kind of very different paradigms of how we can deal with the welfare crisis with cash transfers. And so, roughly speaking, I will go over some of the shared challenges that we are facing in countries like Europe, South Korea, and even developing countries nowadays. I think one of this is rising inequality. We've seen this increasing rapidly also with COVID-19, but also with issues like demographic changes, automation, and the tech giants, how they rapidly concentrate power in a few hands, even more so than the previous corporations 10 years ago, like the oil companies and so on. So in that sense, I think this is a worrying development that we can all feel concerned about, irrespective of the level of development of each country. If we focus more narrowly on the OECD countries, we can see a particular trend with technological unemployment that have to do with also the trend in replacing a lot of service sector jobs with either artificial intelligence or machine learning and robots. And this is obviously one thing that affects the overall proportion of stable, well-paid jobs and the growing size of what they call in the UK the gig economy, which is actually kind of fancy word for low-paid and short-term jobs that are increasingly insecure and precarious. So I think these are the trends right now that we share across different countries, and we know from research and repeated number of headlines and reports from academia and think tanks that the ill effects of the current welfare systems that are mainly based on conditional cash transfers and benefit sanctions, they affect not only people's mental health and economic security, but also their physical health, and more broadly speaking, their human rights and sense of human dignity. And in that sense, we could say that the current welfare system do not provide welfare. They are not fit for purpose. Of course, some of them still provide key services and welfare support, but at the same time, they do undermine the very purpose for which they were designed in the first place. So I think these are some of the common trends right now. Now, if we look more closely at the situation in Europe and compare these two kinds of policies in the UK and Finland, we can see that at the moment there is a kind of two monologues happening, and there's not much dialogue between those two trends. You have the established policymakers, the kind of establishment that keeps pushing for, broadly speaking, a conditional based welfare system. And then you have people emerging from the margins trying to challenge this established system by calling for more unconditional, more universal kinds of welfare. And we can see that it's very tricky because some of the advocates of universal credit, for example, in the UK, they have similar claims as those who advocate for basic income. And that creates a sense of confusion in the public debate. For example, people who pushed for universal credit in Britain, they claim to simplify and unify welfare. They claim to make work pay. And they have all these kind of slogans that can be appealing to a non-specialist audience, and it can kind of confuse the public unless we don't have a clear-minded public kind of talk about basic income and how it differs, how it distinguishes itself from the existing system. So we need to be careful, I think, about this as well. The other thing is that there are many policy entrepreneurs, especially coming from privately funded think tanks, who are very keen to act like competing influencers in the public social policy debate. And for that, they are constantly trying to distinguish themselves with their new pet project, and they reframe basic income in different kinds of ways that sometimes partly overlap with the core basic income that the most progressive advocates envision. And that also confuses the public and creates a very crowded kind of public debate around basic income, which makes it really hard really to follow who to support and how to create this kind of consensus that allows the progressive versions of basic income to become a real policy agenda. So for example, in the UK, there have been several people advocating for universal basic services, basic capitals, and so on. And this can be seen as a reflection of the kind of overgrown diversity of the landscape in terms of, for example, think tanks trying to satisfy their funders to show that they are having their pet project out there and they get more attention and make headlines at the expense of other advocates. This is the one issue that I noticed in Britain in particular. Now, if we roughly look at the main differences between the two policies, you can see that, well, basic income, first of all, is about becoming a universal cash transfer. Many advocates argue that this can only be done gradually. The universal credit is a misnomer. It's neither universal nor a credit. So in that sense, also, it's adding confusion for the public. I've heard quite a few times when I was in Britain, people telling me when I talked about basic income that they were asking me whether I was talking about universal credit, and I had to spend quite a lot of time in the beginning to tell what's the difference, and that just shows, I think, how confused the public can be. Then you have, of course, the unconditionality of basic income that we are familiar with now, and it's, of course, cheaper to administrate, and it basically assumes the best in people. And the universal credit is the opposite kind of assumption. It assumes the worst in people, and that's why it's based on punitive sanctions, whereas basic income is envisioned as sanctions-free and also more gender-neutral, whereas universal credit is based on very gendered assumptions. And by the way, universal credit has been designed as a policy in a very top-down way by a politician, Ian Duncan Smith, a conservative. And I think this shows also how dangerous it is when social policy that has such a big impact can be captured by such a few people whose assumptions can even disproportionately affect the way it's implemented and designed. So it's very important, I think, that basic income is seen as a very participatory democratic process, the very fact of designing the policy before it gets implemented. I think this is essential for the long-term sustainability and legitimacy of that policy. Also, basic income is, of course, about securing a sufficient amount to cover the life essentials, and universal credit is not securing that. In fact, it's completely insufficient, and there are so many people who claim universal credit in the UK who can't even afford to pay the rent, to secure a roof over their head and to buy food. So it's really horrible. In that sense, it doesn't deserve to be seen as part of the welfare system in Britain. It's destitution by design, as someone said. And finally, basic income improves both mental and physical health. It liberates time for people. I think this is very important. It's not just the monetary value, it's also the value in terms of free time to do things with children, with relatives, with friends, to experiment new things in terms of jobs and so on. This is vital, I think, to see it more broadly than its monetary value. And we've seen that in Finland with the experiment. It has liberated time among the claimants of welfare support. And universal credit is exactly the opposite. It forces you to keep looking for a job no matter the nature of the job, and it reduces your time. It just makes you unavailable for your family. It's just not working. It defeats again the purpose. So these are broadly the main differences, and that's why I think those two concrete policies are good examples to illustrate the key differences between those two paradigms that are currently dominating the welfare and social policy landscape. So in a nutshell, universal credit doesn't work because it's just shifting the problem of poverty on benefit to in-work poverty. In that sense, the government withdraws itself even further from its responsibility to protect people from the arbitrariness and inequalities engendered by the market, especially in this day and age of digitalized, financialized market economy. It's increasingly capitalistic and concentrates the power in a fewer hands more than ever before, I would argue. All right, I will move on quickly because there's not much time left. So basically, you have here also differences, of course, that are more complex that we don't have time to cover here, but that are important to mention briefly. For example, the fact that when you compare Finland with Britain, you can see that it's not going to be easy to change the direction of those two policy paradigms in a few years, because obviously there are also long-term factors playing in. And we can see that, I think, very clearly in Finland, for example, where the proportional electoral system helps a lot to build consensus and coalitions behind a policy like basic income, especially because welfare policy touches upon so many social groups of different political tendencies. You need that consensus in order for basic income to be sustainable and stay there beyond the cycles of elections. It has to secure that consensus. And that's where in the UK it gets particularly difficult. And on top of that, as I mentioned, the competition for influence in the public discourse with think tanks, I think makes it also more difficult to get to that stage where it becomes part of the government's agenda, like it was in Finland, I think, as an experiment. And even now in Finland with COVID, you can see that it's still a consensus to secure the welfare of people no matter what. Even for center right-wing parties, it's a consensus, and nobody questions that. So to build that consensus is a long-term project, and we need to be very clear about that, I think. So as you can see, those two policies that are playing out in Europe, they also exist in the global scale. You can see different agencies, for example, that are in favor of conditional targeted welfare cash transfers. I'm thinking here, for example, about the IMF, and to some extent also the OECD. And on the other hand, you have a couple of UN agencies like UNICEF, UNDP, ILO, that are much more in favor of unconditional basic income like cash transfers. So there is this political and moral tension between those two, and we need to deal with that, I think, in any context. It's about political influence at the end. In the UK, there have been repeated numbers of reports, both domestic and international, that have, clarified again and again the problems caused by conditional-like cash transfers. And despite this overwhelming evidence, it's unbelievable that the government of Britain has been able to just dismiss it again and again. So it just shows again how important it is to not rely on the central government that has this exorbitant power to influence, social policy that should be in the hands of much more actors at different levels of the political system. And that's where, again, proportional electoral system can make a big difference. And also a decentralized system in the case of Britain, for example. In the UK, you can see that many advocates are still largely on the left or somewhere in the center, and has changed a lot now with COVID. But we can see also that the autonomy at the local level or the regional level, like in Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales, can help also to kind of break through that gridlock when it's centrally controlled in one particular place, like London. And that just shows again the importance of decentralization and more autonomy, a bit like a federal system in Germany, where maybe, or even in Finland actually, where local governments have much more autonomy than in the UK. That helps a lot, I think, to make progress. In Finland, the experiment has been criticized a lot, sometimes unfairly. The design was quite shy, and in a way, it meant that we couldn't expect much from the start. It was the product of a consensus from parties who were on the right and the center level, and in that sense, it was kind of hijacked from the more long-term advocates in Finland who were more on the left. So that's why the design of the experiment was not that progressive. But still, to be fair, it did generate some positive results in terms of what I mentioned earlier on, the health effect and so on. Basically, yeah, the big problems we have here is that in order to move towards less conditionality, removing sanctions, and make sure that we can create more space for currently people who suffer either as unemployed or as precarious workers, we need to build a stronger consensus. And it's about influencing the policy process and, of course, the political battle. In terms of getting votes and then translating that into some progressive policies like basic income. Taxation is, of course, one big problem right now. I think it's a shared problem in many countries in Europe and also in South Korea, from what I understood. It's a kind of taboo to increase taxes, but I think eventually that's the only way to move forward really towards a more progressive and universal form of basic income. And for that, we will have to address some big issues that are currently blocked on the OECD, for example, agenda, for example, how to tax those digital giants who are practicing tax evasion and reaping massive amount of benefits. We need a consensus at the OECD level around this kind of thing. And we need also to coordinate, I think, more and more in a cross-border fashion, how we can tackle the growing common causes of inequality in order to make sure that basic income can answer those also in a cross-border manner. Okay, I move a bit faster, but yeah, just two quotes from two recipients of the basic income experiment in Finland I think are quite symbolic. One of them said that he felt like he was going out of the prison from the conditional system. I think that means a lot. The other thing is that in an attempt to reframe the so-called activation model in Finland, that is a kind of conditional system imposed by the right-wing party, he said that actually basic income is the best activation model because it allows people to choose their own kind of activation. Of course, they have the autonomy about how they want to activate themselves. And you can't force people in a top-down way to activate themselves with threats and sanctions. It doesn't work. You have to give people that sense of autonomy and independence. And then with that support, they will be able to create most likely more sustainable jobs for themselves. So that's the idea, I think, one big takeaway of the Finnish experiment. Finally, I think we need more progressive taxation, more wealth tax as well. The super rich needs to be taxed, and we need also this cross-border agreement to tackle this because, obviously, taxation is now a global scale issue. We can't address that from one nation state, separately. It has to be done, with a cross-border dialogue, and I think basic income needs to tap into that. We need to reactivate also all the big human rights agenda together with basic income and the sustainable development goals. All this will create a mutually reinforcing agenda, I think, and tap into all the resources and the current struggles that are being waged on different fronts. So that's the idea, roughly speaking. So we need to move towards unconditional basic income. That's the future for this 21st century. And for that, we need to unlearn this survival anxiety mindset that has been instilled upon us for decades and move forward. This is my contribution. Thank you very much.
Mr. Herman Ovier, thank you for presentation. 네, 발표 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you very much for that
다섯 번째 세션의
presentation.
저장을 맡아주실
I will now
애니
give the
밀러
floor
의장님
to
모시고 패널 토론 이어가도록 하겠습니다.
Chairperson Miller,
Now
who
let
will
us
be
begin the panel
moderating our
discussion
fifth
of Session
session.
5. It's my pleasure to call upon Ms. Annie Miller
Thank you
as
very much.
Session Chair
We've
for the
just
last
enjoyed
session.
a very wide-ranging and thorough presentation from Dr. Aube, for which many thanks. And I now have pleasure in inviting the discussants to give their contributions. Now, I'm going to restrict you to 3 minutes each, but I have pleasure in inviting Dr. Lee to start to giving your presentation first. Thank you.
네, 안녕하세요. 오르비에 박사님
Yes,
발표 매우
thank you very
흥미롭게
much,
잘
Dr.
들었고요.
Orbia, for that wonderful
박사님께서 발표하신 내용의
presentation.
대부분의 내용에
And I
동의하고
fully agree with most of
UBI와
your
UC를 또
presentation.
비교하시고
I thought that
그다음에
comparison
최근에
between UC and UBI was very
기본소득 실험
informative.
결과
Also,
특히
you've summarized some of the findings
아빠
from the
두 명에
Finland
대해서
models.
소개하신 것도
Those
매우
two
인상적으로
quotes were very
들었습니다.
impressive.
저는 박사님이 발표하신 것에 두 가지를
I
조금
have
더
actually
추가로
two
토론을
points
이어가고
that I would
싶습니다.
like to add as a way of
이것은
carrying
기술
forward
발전과
the theme that you've
경제
put forward.
구조가 변화하는 것이
There is a
노동시장에
change in
미치고 있는
technology and
영향에
change in
대해서
economic
우리가 좀 더
structure,
주목할
and
필요가
that does
있다는
have a
것입니다.
definite impact on
이렇게
the labor
노동시장이
market.
변하고
I think
있다는
we
것,
need to focus
그리고
on the
이것이
changes that are
기술
happening in
변화에
the
의해서 매우
labor
빠르게
market,
변하고 있다는
and
것,
that speed of
그리고
change is
디지털
very
경제가
fast,
노동시장에
driven by
가지고 있는
technology
함의,
change. Also, we
이것이
have to focus on the
복지국가와의
implications of the digital economy on the labor
결과를
market,
초래하는 데
because
있어서
it could have a
매우 우리가
negative
주목할 부분들이 많다고
outcome for
생각합니다.
the welfare state
먼저
as we
기술
know it.
발전이 고용을
Technology
대체시킬
change,
것인가,
whether it
그다음에 그래서
will
고용 상실을 불러올
replace
것인가에
and
대해서는 여러 이견이 있는
replace
것이
jobs,
맞습니다.
whether there will be a decrease of
그
employment due
외에도
to technology. I
일자리가
think there are
없어지는
different
대신에
views on
일자리가
that
또
question,
창출될 것이다.
because
이런 여러
technology
논쟁이
may
있을 수
actually
있는데,
generate new jobs that
하지만
do not
일자리의
exist
형태가
currently.
상당히
But I think
다변화되고
many people will
그다음에
agree that the
쪼개지는
type
모습을
of employment
보이면서
will become
불안정한
more
노동자가
diverse, that it will
증가하고
be
있다는
more
것에 대해서는
fragmented,
많은
and that
학자들이
there
동의를
is
하고 있는
definitely an
것입니다.
increase of
그런데
precarious
이것이 기존의
employment than before
복지국가와의
due to the technology
부정합을
change.
초래하는
I think
이유를
many people are
저는
concerned that
미싱 미들,
the
그러니까 그동안
this
강가되었던
new
중간지대,
form of labor
중간계층,
market and the
이런
new structure
개념으로
of
설명을
economy,
해보고
there's a
싶습니다.
mismatch between that
지금까지의
and the traditional
복지국가는
conventional
사실
welfare
소득
state.
분위에서
Actually, the conventional
아니면은
welfare state focused more on the lower income
분위에 또 다른 끝쪽에
strata,
있는 안정된
the lower
일자리를 가지고 있는
percentiles,
이 두 집단에
versus
많이
those
집중되어
who have
있었다고
a
볼 수
stable
있습니다.
employment.
저소득은
For the lower
근로능력이 없다고
income
매우
population, there are people who do not have the capability to work. For example, the disabled, the young, the very old, who are not able to participate in the economy anymore. So these are people with tested inabilities to work. So they were provided public assistance. But then there are also people in the economic participation age who do not have enough income, and they are covered, for example, by various social insurances. The problem is that as we go through this digital economy, there are people who fall between the cracks, who are not covered either by social assistance or by social insurance, which is tied to employment. We need to, I think, focus on the fact that there is this blind spot in population that is being created and widening because of this transition to a digital economy. These are people who are not covered by conventional employment, people who work as a part of a platform, company, or freelancers, or who are being hired on a project-by-project basis. These are not people that fall within the concept of a conventional employment. They don't, for example, don't qualify for a means-tested benefit because they do have an income, but they don't have a stable employment source, so they are precarious employment. So they are not covered by either of the two big categories of the conventional welfare state. And they fall between the cracks. So there are this missing middle, I would like to use the word missing middle, and I think this will be highlighted further. I think with the digital transformation, we need to maybe figure out a way of helping them, and basic income could be a way of addressing this missing middle segment. One last comment that I would like to add is, as Dr. Orbien mentioned, there is an increase of precarious workers, but on the other hand, there are some companies that are very rapidly accumulating wealth and capital. For example, the companies that have the access to the data, that have access to the network effect, that own the platform, they are very quickly increasing their dominance and territory in the digital economy. And I think given this mismatch, we need to once again perhaps study the redistribution function of the welfare state. So maybe this redistribution function is not working properly, and that is the reason why we're having this huge disparity between precarious workers increasing and a handful of companies dominating the digital economy. So perhaps basic income would be a way, a mechanism to address this disparity that's widening due to this mismatch. That is my discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And now, because we're running short of time, we'll go quickly to our second panelist, who is Professor Hsu. Please give your discussion, please.
헤르만 오비에 잘 지내시고 계시지요?
First of all, I'd like to say hi to Dr. Orbien, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you for the presentation. You just made a comparison between the UC of the UK and the UBI program of Finland. The UC is designed to encourage work or the employment of people. So actually, UC raised the needs for unconditional basic income program or scheme. And there is a movement to restructure the welfare system in diverse European countries. And it seems that the UC represents a test, means test the benefits, while the UBI experiment made in Finland stands for unconditional provision of basic income. So these two countries make a sharp contrast in terms of this the basic income schemes. But despite the great research or the comparison on these two different systems, I'd like to add a few comments on the improvement points of this comparison and research. First of all,
사실상 그 유의미성
Actually, making this comparison between the conditional UC and unconditional UBI has its own limitations. For example, those who are against the UBI or the BI say that actually the expansion of public assistance or unemployment subsidy will be good enough to care for the unemployed if they are expanded enough. So we need to convince those who are against the UBI or BI, and we need to understand better about the background of the UC design of the UK and the outcome of the UBI experiment in Finland. It seems that the current trend or the shift of the policy direction of the Finnish government is moving toward the conditional kind of the benefit system, which is designed to encourage employment of people or those beneficiaries. So could you please explain more about such kind of the reasons behind such kind of change? And I believe that Dr. Ovie actually wanted to make the conclusion that the UBI works better than UC in terms of the genuine the meaning of the UBI, but still there are limitations to convince that the UBI is better working than UC, because we all know that in all kind of the projects or the programs, the purpose or the goal of the program should be considered, because actually the evaluation indicators or analysis framework can be differentiated according to the goals of different programs. As it was mentioned before, the UBI goal of the UBI is not to encourage people to engage themselves in labor activities or work activities. But UBI of the UBI experiment of Finnish doesn't have such kind of goal, but it seems that the UBI experiment in Finland show diverse, meaningful result of the UBI, but still, it just there's some room to be desired in terms of clarifying the fact that the UBI actually had a very narrow scope of the targets. So it seems that when selecting the targets for the UBI experiments, a large portion of the population was excluded, such as the students or the pension recipients. So actually, by excluding this population, this part of population from the experiment, actually the UBI failed to demonstrate its positive impact in terms of encouraging people to engage themselves in socially meaningful activities rather than finding kind of paid jobs.
생각이 좀 들고요.
And the next point that I want to make is that we need to actually demonstrate the significant meaning or the value of the UBI to introduce UBI in a broader scope. And it seems that many countries around the world are preparing or conducting the UBI experiments or the projects. But the basic income scheme needs to be implemented as a policy even in a limited range rather than the remaining as an experiment. So as I mentioned before, experiment of the UBI has its own limitations. So once it is implemented in a policy, as a form of policy, even in a limited range, then it can demonstrate better how the basic income program or the scheme can have a great meaning or the value. As I've mentioned mentioned before,
실험이라는 걸 이미 인지하고 있는 거죠.
the
그래서
Finnish, the UBI
제한적인
experiment has
범위에서라도
its own
우리는
limitations,
이제
particularly in terms of
실험을
selecting
하자고
the
이야기를
experiment
하고 실험의
targets,
결과가
because
무엇이다
those
라는
targets
이야기를 하는 것이
are
아니라
not actually
정책을 하자.
representing
되더라도 우리 이제 정책을
the
좀
relevant
해보자.
the
그게
targets
범주형이라는 이름이
because
됐든
it has a very
고의적
narrow scope.
기본소득이라는 이름이 됐든지 간에 어떤 그런 주장들로 이제는
So
단계적인
the experiment,
전환이 필요한 단계가 아닌가라는
as I
생각이
mentioned
좀
before, since many
듭니다.
countries are conducting and
경기도
preparing
같은
basic
경우에 사실
income
이제 청년
experiments,
기본소득을
the
지금
basic income
17만
scheme needs to be
5천
implemented
명에게
as a
시행을
policy
하고
scheme,
그리고
and the
이제
Gyeonggi
UHR에
province actually
들었는데요.
provides
물론
this
이제 급여
basic
수준이
income to the
낮고
youth.
만 24세 청년들한테만
Even though
제한적이고
the youth basic income it has its own limitations in Gyeonggi province, because it is targeting the youth at the age of 24, and the basic income, the youth basic income, is very small amount, but still it's very significant because it is implemented as a policy of the provincial government, not an experiment. So even though the youth basic income provided by Gyeonggi provincial government is a small amount, but still it's implemented as a policy, and it demonstrates its value.
그럼에도 불구하고 실험이 아닌
Even
정책이 직접
though
시행이
the range
됐을
is
때
limited,
사회적인
the
아젠다로서 어떤
UBI or the
논의를 하고
BI
그리고
scheme should be
그것들을
implemented
기본소득과
as a
관련된
policy,
아젠다를
because
추동할 수
it can
있는
open
힘은 오히려 이제 정책에서
arena
나온다는
for
생각이
the
좀
public
들고요.
discussion and
그래서 우리가
deliberation
이제는 이런
on
사회적인
the
아젠다로서
scheme
논의하고
of the
사회적인
UBI
수기를
or
좀
BI.
가능하게 하고
So
완전
in order
기본소득으로서
to
어떤
enable
정치적인 실현 가능성을
political
높이기 위한
realization of
전략으로서
the UBI
부분적인
or
제도 시행을
BI,
강력하게 좀 얘기를
as well
해야 될
as
때가
social
아닌가
deliberation, we
싶습니다.
need to think
이상입니다.
about or talk
감사합니다.
about UBI as a policy, not an experiment.
Thank you, Professor Cho. I think now we should go quickly to invite Dr. Devala to give your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you, the organizers of this conference. It's really a pleasure to come back to Korea. The first one was a big success, and congratulations on effectively controlling COVID. And I look forward to the day when I can come back to Gyeonggi province and congratulate the governor myself. Dr. Obi's presentation, I know I'm running against time, but I'll try to stick to 5 minutes. Dr. Obi's presentation was really excellent. I completely agree with his position. I would like to, as a response, I would like to spread the net a little wider so that we bring in various other contexts also into this crisis that we are facing now. We are facing a welfare crisis. Welfare state is facing a crisis, and it comes from the employment crisis that we are facing, which Dr. Obi talked about in terms of the gig economy we have created, the precarious workers we have created. So as a response to this crisis, what are the governments doing? I think UC is one example of patchwork Dr. Obe was referring to. They are doing a patchwork. They are trying to address the symptoms rather than go to the core of the problem. What is the real disease? The real disease is at the very center of our structure, our economy, our employment structure, and our international, whatever the national business models. Our current business models, given where we are technologically, they're not meant to create stable jobs. They're not meant to create secure jobs. This is the past. I think in middle of 20th century, when William Beveridge wrote his kind of a welfare template and a model, that was a very completely different situation where they were actually thinking of full employment. And then the welfare was meant for the exceptions who were falling out of this system for a small percentage, and also the money was meant for those to prepare people into the labor market and for people who have served in the labor market and come out of it. Now, the problem is that today, people with secure jobs are an exception. In India, if you take the Indian working population, 93% of the population is in the informal economy without contracts, no contracts, or temporary contracts. We are dealing with a situation like that in India. I think there are variations of the same happening. Even in the OECD countries, the temporary workers are increasing. I think what the earlier professor was talking about, the missing middle. At the same time, we have created a small group of a couple of dozens of billionaires who hold much of the wealth in the world. Now, the question is, what is the kind of transformation Dr. Abe is suggesting, or we should suggest, all of us, is to move away from this worker-centric welfare regime to a citizen-centric welfare regime. That is the kind of a broad sweep we have to move, not keep searching who is missing, who is missing, who is missing. I think that is a game which can go on forever. In India, that's the game we have been playing last 60 years. So the point is that how do we move to provide this income support to all the citizens? When I use citizens, I mean the permanent residents of a nation. I am also including the normal residents of a country. I'm not excluding the migrants, okay? Those who are going to stay for a longer period. So that's also a question. So that actually, the question we should ask, I think Dr. Abe will agree with me, and all of you may agree with me, is that what is the kind of society that we should build? What is our responsibility today in 2020? In the next 10 years, what is that we are going to do? All nations together. If the welfare crisis is there, employment crisis is there, economic insecurity is seeping into our society and eating away the vitals. Economic insecurity results in the mental health issues that Dr. Abe was referring to. It is resulting in violence. It's resulting in all kinds of pathology of our society. So I think we should go to the core issues when we are talking about this great transformation. I think the government should learn to recognize, look at the storm that is going on and address them. And what is that equitable society we will build if we give an unconditional basic income? We are at all, this old welfare system is talking only about the visible labor in the labor market. What about the invisible labor, care work that women give in this society? We are actually stealing their labor. Without that labor, imagine a society remaining where it is today, remaining stable. So why are we stealing? Let us stop. Let us stop stealing labor from women, senior citizens, all other people. I think that is what basic income is going to do. So this is a crisis, is a good opportunity. In the next 10 years, we should all move towards an unconditional basic income for every human being on this earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davala. That was very interesting. In fact, all the panelists have given us a lot to think about, complementing Dr. Aubier's presentation. Now we still have about a few minutes, and can I just invite each discussant to comment either on someone else's commentary. For instance, well, perhaps I can start by saying, is Dr. Aubier's presentation familiar to South Korea, where he's concentrated on social administration and rather than social insurance, which I suspect has been the main way of supporting people in South Korea? Also, I'd like to ask, is individuality important, and is uniform important, although are those assumed in the unconditionally and universality? And maybe there's not going to be time to answer those questions, but can I have a brief comment from each of the panelists? And I mean 1 minute each, and then I shall ask Dr. Aubier to wind up the session for us. So Professor Lee, would you like to give a very brief comment, please?
네, 한국에서는 근면하고 성실한
In
사람이 정당한
Korea,
대가를
actually
받아야
diligence is a
된다라는
big virtue, and there is a
상당히
widespread
뿌리 깊게 있는 것
perception
같습니다.
that the diligent
그래서
people should be rewarded
무조건성이라는
relevantly.
모속성에 대해서 상당히 논쟁이 많은
So
것
there is a
같습니다.
heated controversies and
그럼에도
arguments
불구하고
over the
기존의 그러면
unconditionality
제도들이
of the
잘
basic
작동하고
income.
있는가에 대해서는 저는
However,
상당히
the
회의적이고
conventional
이
welfare
부분 때문에
system
우려가 많은
is not
것입니다.
properly
지금
working
현재
here in
우리나라의
Korea.
고용보험
And if you take a look at the
실업보험이죠.
unemployment,
실업보험은
the
전체
insurance, the social
취업자의 50%도
insurance
포괄하지 못하고
in
있습니다.
Korea, it
그
just fails
가운데
to
직계
cover
되는
more
것만
than
해도
50% of the
아까
unemployed
말씀드린
as a
일감으로
beneficiary
일하시는
or the
플랫폼
recipient of the unemployment
프리랜서
insurance.
노동자 같은
And to make
경우에는
matters worse,
상명심을
freelancing,
중심으로 더
the
확대되고
workers or
있습니다.
the platform
그래서
workers
저는
also suffer
이
from
고용보험의
the lack
한계가
of
상당히 크고
welfare
이
benefits or
고용보험의
allowances.
한계뿐만이
So
아니라
we have a great
노동시장에서의
limitations to the
근로 이력을
existing
통해서
welfare schemes or system.
급여를
And also
받는
it
연금
fails
또한
to
상당히
accommodate
안정된
or kind of
일자리에서
take
일하시는
care of the
분들에게만 포괄되어
diverse
있는
kind of
것이
workers in
현실입니다.
Korea. And also the pension recipients are missing or not being taken care of properly in Korea under its existing welfare scheme.
말씀드리겠습니다.
Thank you very much. Professor Sho.
Yes, thank you.
사회보험의 비중이 큰 것도
Korea,
맞고요.
yes, does have a large share of social insurance. And then unconditionality, universality, we have here in Korea low support for these concepts. For example, we have a child benefit, universal child benefit, but it was introduced very late. It was only, I think, achieved 100% coverage of 2018. So it's only been 2 years since we had universal child benefits paid out. I think though the COVID-19 has been an opportunity for us to change our thinking, because Korea actually provided universal disaster income, even though it's not a large amount. Everybody in Korea did receive, regardless of means testing, received the support income for the disaster. Of course, I think this was actually an opportunity for people to experience something they had never before, of people receiving money even though they didn't have to work for it. And I think people were actually did experience the benefits of unconditionality because we were able to pay out the benefits very quickly, and they were actually able to experience the large benefit of unconditional universal payments. I think it was a great experience for us in terms of actually seeing what this could do, the concept of universality and unconditionality could do.
Thank you, Professor Sho. Dr. Davala, would you like to spend 1 minute in summarizing your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as Dr. Obi said, universal maybe gradually, but certainly can be said. But about other 4 characteristics of basic income, like individual, periodic, and cash, and most importantly, there can't be a gradual unconditional. Unconditional has to be the very pillar of this policy. It has to be unconditional right away and not gradually. Now, so I think it's important to, but I also believe that small steps are also very important. We should not, we should examine those steps as long as they are in the right direction. We have to welcome them. I think the Gyeonggi province, I think I really like what Professor said, that how many more experiments do we want to do before we come to a policy? How many we need? 100 or 200 or 500? Imagine in order to abolish slavery, if they had had experiments. So in order to implement adult franchise, having experiments. So I think this is the time for actually policy experimenting. We have to do live. So I think what Gyeonggi province has done is an extraordinary step they have taken in that direction. I really congratulate them for what they have done. That's a great lesson for many of us who are also trying to make those small moves in the right direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davala. And now can I invite Dr. Aubier to wrap up the session with thoughts and responding to the discussants' points to his presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so in a few words, just two main things really I would like to say to just wrap up this very interesting exchange. First of all, about what Professor So mentioned, this constant tension between two different kinds of assumptions when it comes to whether we should upscale basic income and make it a central policy for our future welfare systems. I think there is this kind of belief that exists both on the left and right, especially in Western countries, for example, that we are fundamentally selfish and driven by self-interest, and therefore we can't be trusted. So that's why we need this kind of paternalistic policies to govern us. And then on the other hand, you have people who believe that we are fundamentally good people, most of us, and therefore we can trust each other, and therefore we don't need to watch each other with all this system of punitive sanctions and conditionality. And this is always there. And, you know, there are advocates of basic income these days who say that we have moved from the stage of discussing the desirability of basic income to the feasibility. But I think we never stop engaging in this struggle to justify the desirability of basic income. It's a never-ending struggle because this belief is still there, very much, you know, present in popular culture, in psychology, in economics, in philosophy. There are people who believe that we are selfish. That's why the Dutch historian Rutger Bregman published his book, Humankind, A Hopeful History, because he believed that the fundamental problem at the core of basic income is that we have this kind of problematic assumption from the start. And then you have these assumptions rooted in human psychology, but on the other hand, you have also assumptions that are based on what we think we know about the country we live in. And these are also partly assumptions. They are not always empirically based on, you know, available knowledge. And so these two factors, I think they play out in different ways in the way we envision the desirability or feasibility of basic income. And finally, for the digital giants, I think they symbolize the problem we have right now with this kind of belief in selfishness and self-interest of human beings. They are primarily driven by profit and data extraction. They want to enjoy the privilege of acting like monopolies. That's what Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, or Microsoft are trying to do these days in many countries, in many markets where they operate. And they want to secure that monopoly. And now they even use the government of America to, you know, put the Chinese competitors out of that market. And we can see that China also tries to do that in its own way. You know, they use this data extraction to devise this system of the social credit system to engineer the trust, the very trust that is missing in Chinese society. And I think Finland, the reason why they can manage countries like Finland to implement this kind of progressive basic income and in a natural way as well, because they see themselves as a high trust society. And I think we can only rebuild that trust by sharing these kind of stories about how, like Rutger Bregman is doing, you know, revisit our history in a more hopeful way to rebuild this kind of optimistic assumptions about each other, to believe that, yeah, we can make it a citizen-centric policy, not a worker-centric one, assuming that only the people who work hard deserve some welfare, and those who are out of this workers' world, they will be kind of justifiably excluded from welfare. That's not going to work. And for that, of course, we need a redistribution of power and together with this rebuild of collective trust. So that's my takeaway from recent trends. But yeah, thank you so much. It's really exciting to talk about basic income. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubier. And thank you, all the other panelists. I'd like to thank the conference, particularly for myself, Dr. Devala and Dr. Obier, for being invited to join in this panel and this exciting discussion. I really think Korea is in the forefront of examining basic income, and we wish it all the best for very successful outcomes. And I hope some of the other countries in the world will follow its excellent example. So thank you very much on our behalf, and I hand you over now to the MC. Thank you.
Ms. Danny Miller, thank you for presentation
네,
and moderating
밀러 의장님
the discussion. 마지막까지 기본소득에 대해 심도 있는 논의가 이루어졌다는 것
We've had
있었고요.
this
알찬 세션이었던
last
것 같습니다.
session.
함께해 주신 모든
Thank you very
연사분들께
much,
다시 한번 감사의 말씀을
all the
전합니다.
speakers and panelists
다섯
for
번째
participating.
세션을 끝으로
And this
어느덧
ends our
2020
last
대한민국 기본소득
session
박람회
5.
중에서 제2회 경기도 기본소득 국제
The last
컨퍼런스의
session
막을
of the
내릴
second
시간이
Gyeonggi Province
되었는데요.
Basic
차기
Income
행사에도
International
뜨거운
Conference.
관심과 참여 부탁드리면서
I hope that you will join us again for our third
국제 컨퍼런스를
international
마치도록
conference.
하겠습니다. 지금까지 경기도청의 부영술이었습니다.
Thank you very much
시청해주신 여러분 대단히 감사합니다.
for tuning in.
Thank you for participation, and we hope to see all of you again at the next Gyeonggi Province Basic Income International Conference.